The card was declined at the steakhouse in front of the entire country club board. "What the hell did you do to our money?" My father hurled the heavy metal credit card across the granite kitchen island. It struck the marble fruit bowl with a sharp clatter and spun to a halt inches from my hands. I set down my laptop bag and looked at the black plastic square, then up at his red face. I simply smiled. I moved my paycheck to a new bank and locked every joint account we had. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family that saw you as nothing more than an ATM. My name is Natalie. I am 33 years old, and for the last 10 years, I have been the silent financial engine keeping my family's wealthy facade intact. I work as a senior project manager at a major financial technology firm in Chicago. I make an excellent salary, but you would never know it by looking at my savings account until yesterday. I stepped fully into the kitchen of the sprawling suburban mansion my parents claimed to own. My father, Harold, a 62-year-old man who cared more about his golf handicap and his country club membership than his own character, was gripping the edge of the island so hard his knuckles were white. The dinner he had just tried to host was supposed to be a power play. He was supposed to treat 4 local real estate developers to $1,000 dry-aged steaks and expensive bourbon to prove he was still a big player in the market. Instead, the waiter had to quietly inform him that his premium credit card was declined for insufficient funds. "That is not our money, Harold," I said, using his first name deliberately. "That is my money, my salary from my job. I just finally stopped letting you steal it." "You insolent brat!" Harold shouted, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to sit there while the waiter handed me back that card? I had to ask one of the developers to cover the bill. My reputation in this town is ruined because you decided to play some petty game with the family accounts." "It is not a game," I replied calmly, "and it is definitely not your account." Before my father could launch into another tirade, the door to the garage banged open. My 28-year-old brother Brandon stormed into the kitchen. Brandon was the golden child, the perpetual entrepreneur who had never actually held down a real job or made a single dime of profit in his life. He was always just one investment away from becoming a billionaire or so, my parents loved to tell their friends. "Natalie, what is going on?" Brandon demanded, waving his smartphone in the air. "I just got an alert from the dealership. The automatic lease payment on the Porsche bounced. They are charging a late fee and saying they will send a repo man if it is not cleared by Friday. You need to log in and fix the routing number right now." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "I am not fixing anything, Brandon. I canceled the automatic transfer. You want to drive a $100,000 sports car, you can figure out how to pay the $2,000 monthly lease yourself." Brandon stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "What are you talking about? You have always paid for the car. Mom and Dad said it was part of my compensation for managing the family portfolio." I actually laughed out loud at that. The family portfolio. You mean the completely empty brokerage account Dad drained 5 years ago to buy a boat he had to sell at a loss? You do not manage anything, Brandon. You sit at home playing video games and posting motivational quotes on social media while I work 60 hours a week to fund your lifestyle. Harold slammed his hand on the counter. "That is enough. You will not disrespect your brother in this house. You will open your laptop right now, transfer the funds back to the primary trust account, and you will pay Brandon's car lease. I raised you. I put a roof over your head. I invested in you, and this is the return I get on my investment. Complete betrayal." The audacity of his words sent a cold rush of adrenaline through my veins. This was the moment I had been preparing for. "You invested in me?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. "Let us talk about that investment, Dad. Let us pull up the receipts." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. I had spent the last 3 months compiling every single financial record, every bank statement, every transaction history spanning the last decade. I slapped the folder down on the island next to the rejected credit card. "You did not pay for my college," I said, staring directly into his eyes. "I took out $70,000 in student loans to get my degree because you told me the business was going through a rough patch. I worked night shifts as a waitress to pay for my own textbooks. Meanwhile, you fully funded Brandon's out-of-state tuition, his fraternity dues, and his luxury off-campus apartment just for him to fail all his classes and drop out after 3 years. That was different. Harold blustered, his face turning a deeper shade of red. Brandon needed the networking opportunities. Business is about connections. I ignored his excuse and opened the folder. Then I graduated and got a high-paying job in fintech. You convinced me to deposit my paycheck into a joint family trust account to maximize our investment potential. You said we were building generational wealth, but there are no investments. I pointed to a highlighted bank statement. Last year alone, you spent $40,000 of my money on country club fees, golf trips, and tailored suits. You used my bonuses to cover the property taxes on this house. I have been paying for Brandon's car, his insurance, and his gym membership. We are a family, Harold shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. In this family, we support each other. You have been living in this beautiful house rent-free. You owe us for the lifestyle you get to enjoy. I am not living rent-free, I snapped back. I pay the utility bills. I pay for the groceries. And as of yesterday, I opened a new account at Capital One. My employer updated my direct deposit. The joint trust account is frozen. You have exactly zero access to my earnings from now on. The bank told me you tried to initiate a wire transfer this morning, and it was flagged for fraud. Brandon looked panicked, now his eyes darting between me and our father. Dad, what are we going to do? The car payment is due. I have a networking trip to Las Vegas next week. I already booked the VIP table. You booked a VIP table with what money? I asked mockingly. The money you thought you were going to steal from my next paycheck. Have fun explaining to the club that you are broke. Just then, my mother Beatrice rushed into the kitchen. She was wearing a silk robe and had a distressed look on her face, perfectly practicing the role of the fragile peacemaker. Beatrice was a master at using emotional manipulation to get exactly what she wanted, while pretending to be completely innocent of the financial abuse happening in our home. What is all this yelling? Beatrice gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Harold, your blood pressure. Natalie, how could you upset your father like this? He works so hard for us. I turned to my mother, feeling the last shreds of my patience evaporate. He does not work at all, Mom. He has not closed a real estate deal in 4 years. He just plays golf and spends my money, and do not act like you are innocent in this. Beatrice's eyes filled with immediate manufactured tears. How can you speak to me that way? I am your mother. I gave you life. I nurtured you. We are a family, Natalie. We do not keep score with money. We do not keep score, I repeated, my voice rising. Then why did I get an alert from the Internal Revenue Service last month? Why did I pull my credit report and find out that my score had plummeted by 200 points? Beatrice froze. The tears instantly vanished from her eyes, replaced by genuine panic. She took a step back, bumping into the refrigerator. I do not know what you are talking about. I pulled another document from the folder and held it up. This is a credit report. 5 years ago, you took my social security number and opened 3 different premium credit cards in my name without my permission. You maxed them out, buying designer handbags, spa treatments, and catering for your ridiculous charity galas. You have been making the minimum payments using the money you siphoned from my paycheck in the joint account. Harold looked shocked, turning to his wife. Beatrice, what is she talking about? But I was not done. It gets worse, Harold, I said, shifting my gaze between the two of them. I dug deeper into the public property records. Do you want to know how Mom secured the mortgage refinancing on this very mansion 3 years ago? She used my income and my credit history as a cosigner. She forged my signature on the mortgage documents. You committed wire fraud and identity theft to maintain the illusion that you are wealthy suburbanites. Beatrice covered her face with her hands, letting out a dramatic sob. I had to do it. The bank was going to foreclose. Your father's business deals fell through. We would have lost our home. Where would we have gone? I did it to protect the family. You make so much money, Natalie. I knew you would not mind helping us out. I was going to pay it back. You committed a federal crime, I shouted, finally losing my temper. You saddled me with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt that I did not consent to. You ruined my credit score. I tried to apply for an apartment lease last week and was rejected because on paper I look like a financial disaster with a maxed out debt to income ratio. You stole my financial future to buy yourself designer shoes and protect Harold's ego. Brandon scoffed, clearly missing the severity of the situation. Oh, please. You are being so dramatic, Natalie. You work in tech. You can easily fix your credit. Stop playing the victim and just unlock the account so we can go back to normal. I really need that car payment cleared. I looked at my brother, absolutely disgusted by his entitlement. Normal is over, Brandon. I have already contacted the credit bureaus and filed a fraud alert. I spoke with a lawyer this morning. If you ever try to access my money again, I will press criminal charges for identity theft against my own mother. Harold's face contorted into a mask of pure rage. He marched toward me, his chest puffed out, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me the way he had when I was a child. But I was not a child anymore. You listen to me, you ungrateful little wretch! Harold snarled, his voice vibrating with anger. You are going to log into your laptop right now. You are going to reverse the fraud alert. You are going to transfer your entire paycheck back into the joint family account, and you are going to pay the mortgage and your brother's lease. You owe us your life. If you do not open that account right now, you can pack your bags and get the hell out of my house. You are dead to me. He stood there, breathing heavily, expecting me to crumble. He expected me to cry, to beg for forgiveness, to cave under the threat of losing my family. That was how it had always worked. They would push me to the brink, threaten to cut me off emotionally, and I would open my wallet to buy back their love. But the woman standing in their kitchen had nothing left to give. I looked at Harold's red face, at Beatrice's fake tears, at Brandon's greedy, expecting eyes. I felt an incredible sense of peace wash over me. The heavy, suffocating chain of familial obligations simply snapped. Fine by me, Harold, I said, my voice completely steady. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass house key. I dropped it onto the granite island. It landed with a satisfying clink right next to the rejected credit card. I already packed my bags this morning before I went to the office. They're in the trunk of my car. I knew exactly how you would react when the money tap ran dry. I am leaving. And just so we are perfectly clear, I am not paying another dime toward this house, these credit cards, or that ridiculous Porsche. When the bank comes to foreclose, and they will, do not call me. Harold looked stunned, his threat having backfired completely. Wait, you cannot just leave. The mortgage payment is due next week. We do not have the cash liquid right now. I picked up my laptop bag and turned toward the garage door. Then I suggest you start selling Beatrice's designer handbags. Or better yet, tell Brandon to get a job. Good luck with the repo man on Friday. I walked out the door and let it slam shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my mother's sudden, genuine wailing. I got into my car, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway of the house that had been my financial prison for a decade. As I drove away from the pristine suburban neighborhood, my phone started ringing. It was Harold. I watched his name flash on the screen for a few seconds, then calmly blocked his number. I blocked Beatrice. I blocked Brandon. I merged onto the highway, heading toward the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the skyline. My credit might be temporarily ruined, and my family might despise me, but as I looked at the balance in my secure private bank account, I realized something profound. I was finally in control of my own life. The dominoes had been tipped, and I was going to let them fall exactly where they belonged. The morning after I drove away from that house of lies, Harold decided to operate on pure denial. For a narcissist, reality is entirely optional, as long as the audience is still watching. He woke up, put on his crisp white polo shirt, grabbed his custom golf clubs, and drove his leased SUV to the Oak Brook Country Club. This was his sanctuary. This was where he played the role of the successful real estate magnate surrounded by men who measured a person's worth by the brand of their watch and the size of their bar tab. He strutted into the clubhouse dining room with his chest puffed out loudly, greeting his usual foursome. "Drinks are on me today, gentlemen," Harold announced, slapping a fellow club member on the back. "We are celebrating a huge commercial deal I just closed in the city." He slid his gold member card across the polished mahogany bar. The bartender, a young man who had served Harold for years, took the card and swiped it through the terminal. A sharp beep echoed over the soft jazz playing in the background. The bartender frowned and swiped it again. Another error tone sounded. "Sorry, Mr. Sullivan," the bartender said, keeping his voice low. "The system is rejecting the card. It says the account is suspended." Harold scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Just a glitch in your antiquated system. Run it manually." Before the bartender could press another button, the heavy oak door to the management office opened. Mr. Caldwell, the general manager of the country club, stepped out. He did not have his usual welcoming smile. He looked stern, carrying a manila file folder in his hands. "Harold, if you could step into my office for a moment," Caldwell said. His voice was polite, but carried an edge of absolute authority that made the other men at the bar turn their heads. Harold kept his arrogant smirk, adjusting his collar. "Give me a minute, boys. Caldwell probably wants my advice on the new landscaping budget." He followed the manager into the office, the heavy door clicking shut behind them. Caldwell did not offer Harold a seat. He simply opened the folder and turned it around so Harold could see the paperwork. "Your membership has been immediately suspended, Harold," Caldwell stated flatly. "The quarterly dues for the past 6 months were flagged and reversed early this morning. Furthermore, the primary account holder contacted our billing department at 7 o'clock today. She explicitly removed her payment authorization and provided legal notice that any future charges under your name are unauthorized and will be prosecuted as fraud." Harold felt the blood drain from his face. The walls of the luxurious office suddenly felt like they were closing in. There must be a misunderstanding. He stammered, his confident facade cracking. "My daughter manages my finances. She is just having a little temper tantrum. I will have the funds wired by Monday morning." Caldwell closed the folder. "We are not a collection agency, Harold. We do not do layaway for memberships. You currently owe the club over $14,000 in reversed dues, bar tabs, and pro shop expenses. Until that balance is cleared with a certified cashier's check, you are no longer permitted on the premises." "Do you know who I am?" Harold shouted, his face flushing a deep, angry purple. "I have been a member here for 10 years. You cannot treat me like some street beggar." Caldwell picked up his desk phone. "I am treating you like a man who just tried to buy expensive liquor with a canceled card. Please leave the club voluntarily, Harold. If you make a scene, I will have security escort you out, and I assure you, your friends at the bar will see every second of it." Harold stood frozen. His entire identity, his fragile ego, was tied to this club. He turned around and opened the office door. The men at the bar immediately looked his way. Harold forced a tight, agonizing smile, raising his hand in a fake wave. "Business emergency, boys," Harold called out, his voice shaking slightly. "Have to take a rain check on that round. Duty calls." He practically sprinted through the lobby, his golf cleats clicking loudly against the marble floor. He could feel the eyes of the staff and the other members burning into his back. The whispers started before he even pushed through the double-glass doors. The wealthy real estate tycoon was nothing but a fraud, and the entire club now knew it. While Harold was suffering his public humiliation, a different kind of disaster was unfolding 20 miles away at the suburban mansion. Brandon woke up at noon, stretching lazily in his king-sized bed. He grabbed his phone to check his social media, ready to post another highly filtered photo of his luxurious lifestyle. He prided himself on projecting the image of a young self-made entrepreneur. His entire brand relied on the sleek, jet-black Porsche Panamera parked in the driveway. A loud, rumbling diesel engine echoed through his bedroom window, followed by the clanking of heavy metal chains. Brandon threw off the covers and walked to the window. His heart stopped. A massive flatbed tow truck was backed directly up to the driveway. A burly man in a neon safety vest was already hooking thick steel chains to the rear axle of the Porsche. Brandon bolted out of his room, sprinting down the stairs in nothing but his silk pajama pants. He threw open the front door and ran barefoot down the driveway. "Hey! Get away from my car!" Brandon screamed, waving his arms wildly. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" The tow truck driver, a man with a thick beard and zero patience, did not even look up from the winch controls. "Repossession, buddy. Step back from the vehicle before you get hurt." "You cannot take my car." Brandon yelled, planting himself between the tow truck and the Porsche. There has been a mistake. The lease is paid. My sister pays the lease. Just let me call her. The driver pulled a clipboard from his truck and shoved it toward Brandon. 3 months of missed payments, kid. The primary signer canceled the financial backing yesterday and informed the dealership the car was no longer insured or funded. The bank owns this vehicle now. Move. Neighbors were starting to peek out from behind their curtains. Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood gossip who lived directly across the street, stepped out onto her porch with a watering can, making absolutely no effort to hide the fact that she was watching the entire spectacle. Brandon felt a hot flush of deep, agonizing shame. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands and dialed my number. He expected it to ring. He expected me to pick up, listen to him beg, and magically fix the problem like I always did. The automated voice on the line was clinical and cold. The number you are trying to reach is unavailable. She blocked me. Brandon whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. She actually blocked me. The winch engaged with a loud mechanical screech. The Porsche was dragged unceremoniously onto the steel ramp of the flatbed. Brandon stood frozen on the concrete driveway, his bare feet freezing in the morning air, watching his entire fake persona being driven away down the street. He had no car, he had no money, he had no job. He ran back inside the house, slamming the front door shut to escape the judging eyes of Mrs. Gable. He found his mother Beatrice sitting at the kitchen island, staring blankly at a stack of unopened mail. Her eyes were red and swollen. "Mom!" Brandon yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "They took my car. Natalie actually let them take my car. Call her right now and tell her to fix this." Beatrice looked up at her son, her hands trembling as she held her smartphone. "I cannot call her, Brandon. She blocked my number too. I tried to log into the grocery delivery app this morning and the account was deleted. I tried to order coffee and the card was declined. She cut us off completely." The front door burst open. Harold marched into the foyer, throwing his golf bag onto the hardwood floor with a violent crash. He looked like a man who had just lost a war. His face was pale, his breathing shallow and rapid. "They kicked me out," Harold gasped, leaning against the wall for support. "Caldwell suspended my membership. He humiliated me in front of the entire board." Beatrice covered her face with her hands, letting out a sharp, pathetic sob. "Harold, what are we going to do?" "The refrigerator is empty. The utility bills are due next week. We do not have a single dollar in our checking account." Harold straightened his posture, his narcissistic rage overriding his panic. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his eyes narrowing with malicious intent. "She thinks she can destroy us and just walk away." Harold sneered, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "She thinks because she makes a little bit of tech money she holds all the cards. I am going to remind that ungrateful brat exactly who she is dealing with." Harold scrolled through his contacts and pressed the call button. He put the phone on speaker and set it on the granite island so Beatrice and Brandon could hear. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional female voice answered. "Hello, Harold?" "Aaliyah," Harold said, forcing a tone of paternal authority. "I need you to drop whatever you are doing at your law firm right now. We have a family emergency. Natalie has lost her mind. She is trying to illegally lock us out of our own family trust accounts. I want you to draft a lawsuit for financial fraud and embezzlement. I want her assets frozen by the end of the day." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Aaliyah was Brandon's wife, a brilliant corporate attorney, and the only person in this family who actually intimidated Harold. She had always kept a polite professional distance from my parents' financial circus, observing everything but saying very little. "Harold." Aaliyah's voice came through the speaker, chillingly calm and precise. "I am a corporate litigator, not a miracle worker. You cannot sue someone for stopping the deposits of their own legal paycheck. But since you called, I think you and Beatrice need to come to my office. Immediately. I just received a certified document from the county clerk's office, and it seems you have a much bigger problem than a canceled country club membership." The digital clock on my sleek minimalist nightstand glowed a soft blue reading 8:15 p.m. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my newly leased penthouse apartment in downtown Chicago, swirling a glass of expensive Merlot. The city lights spread out before me like a glittering carpet of possibility, a stark contrast to the suffocating beige walls of the suburban mansion I had escaped just hours ago. This place, secured 3 months prior in careful anticipation of my departure, was my sanctuary. It was paid for entirely with my own money, signed under an LLC to ensure my family could never trace my whereabouts. My phone, resting on the sleek marble kitchen island, buzzed for the 37th time since I left. I had ignored every single call from Harold and Brandon, anticipating their predictable rage. But Beatrice, true to form, was employing a different, far more insidious tactic. She was weaponizing guilt. I picked up the device and saw a long list of voicemails, all from my mother. I took a slow sip of the wine, letting the rich flavor coat my tongue, and pressed play on the first message. "Natalie, please." Beatrice's voice wavered, thick with dramatic performative tears. "You have to come back. Your father is beside himself. Brandon is locked in his room. You are destroying our family over a silly misunderstanding about money. Please, sweetheart, just transfer the funds back, and we can forget this ever happened." I rolled my eyes and skipped to the next message, sent 20 minutes later. "Natalie, are you listening to me?" Beatrice's tone had shifted from pleading to frantic. "The bank called. They are threatening foreclosure. How could you do this to your own mother? I gave you everything. I sacrificed my youth to raise you, and you leave us here to starve. If you do not answer this phone right now, I am going to have a heart attack. I can feel my chest tightening. I am calling an ambulance. It will be your fault if I die." A hollow laugh escaped my lips. Beatrice had always used phantom illnesses as her ultimate trump card. Whenever Harold was close to being exposed for a bad financial decision, or whenever I tried to set a boundary, she would miraculously develop severe chest pains or dizzy spells that required everyone to drop what they were doing and cater to her needs. It was a masterclass in emotional terrorism, designed to ensure I remained the compliant, self-sacrificing daughter. I took another sip of wine and listened to the third message, sent just moments ago. "Natalie, this is your last chance." Beatrice sobbed loudly into the receiver, the performance reaching its crescendo. "I am standing in the bathroom holding a bottle of pills. I cannot take this anymore. The stress of your betrayal is too much. If you do not unlock those accounts, I swear I will swallow the whole bottle. You will have to live with my death on your conscience for the rest of your miserable life. Call me back immediately." For a brief, terrifying second, the old programming flared in my chest. A sharp spike of conditioned panic hit me, urging me to call her back, to apologize, to fix everything, to ensure she was safe. I had spent 33 years internalizing the belief that I was solely responsible for her emotional and physical well-being. But that panic quickly dissolved, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. She was not going to take those pills. She was not having a heart attack. She was sitting in her master bathroom, fully dressed, staring at her phone and waiting for me to crack. She was waiting for the familiar dynamic to play out, where she played the victim, and I played the savior, handing over my hard-earned money to buy her temporary peace. I looked at the phone, feeling a profound sense of disgust. She was willing to threaten her own life, to inflict unimaginable emotional violence on her daughter, just to regain access to my paycheck. It was not about love. It was not about family. It was about control. I set the glass of wine down on the marble counter. I opened my phone settings and navigated to the block list. I selected Beatrice's contact name, my finger hovering over the screen. For a moment, I thought about all the years I had sacrificed, all the dreams I had deferred, all the student debt I had accumulated while she bought designer handbags and my father played golf. I thought about the sheer audacity of her forging my signature on a mortgage document, saddling me with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt without my consent. I pressed the block button. The screen blinked, confirming the action. Silence descended upon the penthouse, deep and absolute. There would be no more voicemails. There would be no more frantic texts or manipulative threats. The lifeline they had relied on for a decade was permanently severed. I picked up my wine glass and walked back to the window, looking out over the city. I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy, suffocating weight of their expectations had been lifted. I was no longer the family ATM. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was simply Natalie, a successful project manager, living in a beautiful apartment, entirely in control of my own destiny. Let them deal with the foreclosure. Let Brandon figure out how to pay for his ruined credit. Let Harold explain his canceled country club membership. They had built a house of cards on a foundation of my stolen financial future, and now a gentle breeze was enough to blow it all down. I finished the wine, setting the empty glass on the counter. The real fun was just beginning. Beatrice's frantic voicemails were only the opening act. Harold was about to discover a truth far more devastating than a canceled golf membership or a repossessed Porsche. He was about to find out exactly who owned the roof over his head. Harold paced the length of the gourmet kitchen, his leather loafers slapping against the imported Italian marble floors. The morning sun streamed through the massive bay windows, illuminating the pristine granite countertops and the custom cherry wood cabinets. This house was his fortress. It was the physical manifestation of the Harold Sullivan brand. It was the backdrop for every country club dinner party, every holiday gathering, and every networking event he had hosted for the last 15 years. He stopped pacing and slammed his fist against the kitchen island. "We are not going down like this," Harold announced to the empty room. He looked at Beatrice, who was still slumped over the breakfast nook, clutching a cold cup of coffee. Brandon was slouched on the velvet sofa in the adjacent living room, mindlessly scrolling through his phone, looking for a distraction from his repossessed Porsche. Harold straightened his collar, a new wave of arrogant determination washing over him. Natalie thinks she is the only one who understands finance. She thinks locking a checking account is going to ruin me. She forgets who taught her everything she knows. I am a real estate developer. I know how to leverage assets. Beatrice looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "What are you talking about, Harold? We do not have any liquid assets. The bank accounts are frozen. We cannot even buy groceries." "We have this house, Beatrice," Harold said, spreading his arms wide to encompass the sprawling suburban mansion. "Do you have any idea how much this property has appreciated in the last decade? We sit in one of the most exclusive zip codes in the state. We have easily $500,000 in pure equity tied up in these walls. I am going to call the mortgage company right now. I will open a home equity line of credit. We can pull out $100,000 in cash by the end of the week. That will cover your credit cards, get Brandon a new car, and float my business expenses until my next big commercial deal closes." Brandon sat up, a glimmer of hope returning to his eyes. "You can do that. You can just pull cash out of the house. Watch and learn, son." Harold smirked, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. "This is how real businessmen handle temporary cash flow issues. You leverage your portfolio." Harold navigated to his contacts and dialed the premier customer service line for Vanguard National Bank, the institution that held their mortgage. He placed the phone flat on the marble island and tapped the speakerphone button, wanting his wife and son to hear exactly how a master negotiator took control of a crisis. The automated system chimed, routing his call through the high-net-worth individual queue. A few seconds later, a crisp, professional voice came through the speaker. "Thank you for calling Vanguard National Bank Executive Accounts Division. My name is Cynthia. With whom do I have the pleasure of speaking today?" "Yes, Cynthia, this is Harold Sullivan." Harold projected his most authoritative, booming voice. "I need to initiate an expedited home equity line of credit on my primary residence. I am looking to draw approximately $150,000 against my current equity. I need you to connect me with a senior loan officer immediately so we can bypass the standard waiting period." "Certainly, Mr. Sullivan," Cynthia replied smoothly. "I can transfer you to our lending department. However, for security purposes, I just need to verify your account information. Could you please provide the property address and the last 4 digits of your social security number?" Harold rattled off the address of the suburban mansion and his information. He tapped his fingers rhythmically against the granite, winking at Brandon. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Please hold for just one moment while I access your file." The hold music played for a short, agonizing 30 seconds. Harold continued to smile, already mentally spending the money. He would buy a new set of custom golf clubs just to spite Caldwell. He would walk back into the country club and slap a stack of $100 bills on the bar. The music stopped and Cynthia returned to the line. Her tone had shifted. It was no longer the overly accommodating voice of a premier service agent. It was clinical, cautious, and strictly procedural. Mr. Sullivan, I apologize for the delay. I am looking at the address provided. I cannot transfer you to a loan officer to initiate a home equity line of credit. Harold frowned, leaning closer to the phone. What do you mean you cannot transfer me? Is there a system outage? I have been a client of Vanguard National Bank for 15 years. I have never missed a single mortgage payment. Sir, you do not have an active mortgage account with our institution, Cynthia stated flatly. Harold let out a sharp, condescending laugh. That is ridiculous. Of course I have a mortgage with you. My daughter Natalie manages our family trust. She wires the mortgage payment directly to Vanguard on the first of every single month. Check your system again, Cynthia. You are making a very embarrassing clerical error. I assure you, sir, there is no error on our end. Cynthia replied, her voice remaining perfectly steady. I am looking at the archived file for this property. Your daughter may have been wiring funds to someone, but she has not been wiring them to Vanguard National Bank. Your mortgage account was officially closed and written off exactly 24 months ago. The kitchen went dead silent. Beatrice stopped breathing. Brandon slowly lowered his phone. Written off. Harold barked, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. What the hell does written off mean? I live in this house. I am standing in the kitchen right now. You do not just write off a $2 million estate. Please lower your voice, Mr. Sullivan, Cynthia warned politely. According to our legal records, your mortgage went into severe default 2.5 years ago. You missed 9 consecutive payments. A notice of default was issued, and the property entered the final stages of foreclosure. The bank was preparing to seize the asset and schedule a sheriff's auction. That is a lie. Harold screamed, slamming his hands onto the island. I never received a foreclosure notice. Nobody came to my door. Nobody evicted us. We never went to court. You were not evicted because the property never went to public auction. Cynthia explained, reading directly from the legal notes in her system. 3 days before the scheduled foreclosure sale, a private investment firm approached our distressed asset division. They offered to purchase the debt in its entirety. They paid off the outstanding principal, covered all the late fees, and satisfied the defaulted loan. Vanguard National Bank accepted the offer and transferred the deed to the private entity. We no longer hold the paper on this house. We have no financial relationship with you. Harold felt the room begin to spin. The solid marble floor beneath his feet suddenly felt like it was crumbling into dust. He grabbed the edge of the island, his knuckles turning white. Are you telling me the bank sold my house out from under me? Harold yelled, his voice cracking with genuine panic. Who bought it? Give me the name of the investment firm right now. I will sue them. I will sue Vanguard. This is illegal. It is entirely legal, Mr. Sullivan. When a property enters foreclosure, the bank has the right to sell the distressed debt to recoup its losses, Cynthia replied. The entity that purchased the deed is registered as Nova Crest Holdings, LLC. Harold stared at the phone. Nova Crest Holdings. He had never heard of them. It sounded like a faceless corporate conglomerate. Some massive Wall Street firm had swooped in and stolen his kingdom while he was busy playing golf. Who owns Nova Crest Holdings? Harold demanded, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. Give me the name of the CEO. Give me the name of the managing director. I demand to know who owns the house I'm standing in. I do not have a list of corporate shareholders, sir, Cynthia said. We only keep the primary point of contact on file for the deed transfer and the initial tax documentation. I can provide you with the name of the registered managing director who signed the final purchase agreement with our bank 2 years ago. Give me the name. Harold growled, his teeth bared like a cornered animal. Cynthia paused for a brief second, typing on her keyboard. The keystrokes echoed through the speakerphone like the ticking of a time bomb. The managing director on file for Nova Crest Holdings, LLC is Natalie Sullivan, Cynthia stated clearly. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Beatrice let out a small, strangled gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Brandon stared at the phone with wide, horrified eyes. Harold could not speak. His vocal cords refused to function. His brain short-circuited as the magnitude of what he had just heard violently collided with his reality. Natalie did not just stop paying his bills. Natalie had let the house go into foreclosure on purpose. She had let him default, and then acting behind the impenetrable shield of a corporate LLC, she had swooped in and bought the debt for pennies on the dollar. She had paid off the bank using the very salary he claimed he had a right to. For the last 2 years, Harold had been walking around this mansion bragging about his equity, boasting about his real estate acumen, demanding respect as the king of his castle. But he owned nothing. He had zero equity. He had zero assets. For 24 months, Harold Sullivan had been nothing more than a squatter living entirely on the charity of the daughter he had just thrown out of the house. Natalie owned the marble floors. Natalie owned the custom cabinets. Natalie owned the roof over his head. "Mr. Sullivan, are you still there?" Cynthia asked through the speaker. "Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" Harold reached out with a trembling hand and pressed the end call button. The screen went black. He slowly looked up from the phone and stared at the kitchen walls. They no longer looked like a fortress. They looked like a meticulously designed trap. Natalie had not just cut off the money supply, she had systematically dismantled his entire life, securing the ultimate collateral before she ever walked out the door. Beatrice began to cry again, a low, terrified whimper that vibrated with genuine dread. "We are homeless," she whispered, rocking back and forth on her stool. "Our own daughter bought our house. She is going to throw us out on the street." "No!" Harold roared, suddenly snapping out of his shock. His terror instantly morphed into a blind, desperate rage. "She cannot do this. She used our money to buy this house. That is fraud. That is embezzlement. She manipulated the trust account to steal our property." Harold grabbed his phone, his thumb violently striking the screen as he scrolled through his contacts. He was not going to let a 33-year-old girl outsmart him. He needed legal firepower. He needed someone ruthless. He needed to strike back before Natalie filed the eviction paperwork. Harold found the contact name he was looking for and pressed the green button. He bypassed his usual fake pleasantries the second the call connected. Aaliyah Brandon's wife was a senior associate at one of Chicago's most prestigious corporate litigation firms. She was a brilliant, no-nonsense African-American woman who had always maintained a polite but highly observant distance from the Sullivan family's financial theatrics. Harold barked his orders into the receiver, demanding she drop everything and come to the house immediately for a catastrophic legal emergency. 30 minutes later, Aaliyah walked through the double mahogany front doors. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal pantsuit, her expression completely unreadable. Harold and Beatrice were pacing in the grand foyer, while Brandon hovered nervously near the staircase, still mourning the loss of his sports car. Harold did not even offer her a glass of water. He marched right up to his daughter-in-law and shoved a disorganized thick stack of papers directly into her hands. It was a chaotic mix of old family trust agreements, outdated bank statements, and printed emails. "Natalie is trying to steal our home," Harold declared, his voice echoing loudly off the vaulted ceiling. "She committed corporate fraud. She used a shell company to illegally purchase our mortgage behind my back, and now she is threatening to evict us. I want you to file a massive lawsuit against her. I want her bank accounts frozen by 5 o'clock today. I want her destroyed, Aaliyah." Aaliyah did not flinch at his aggressive volume. She calmly adjusted her glasses and looked down at the messy pile of papers. As a seasoned corporate litigator, her mind worked in facts, timelines, and legal precedents. She spotted the glaring holes in Harold's hysterical story within seconds. She knew that a legitimate federally regulated bank does not simply sell a primary mortgage deed to a private LLC unless the original borrower had severely defaulted for a very long time. She also knew her sister-in-law. Natalie was fiercely intelligent, incredibly meticulous, and entirely risk-averse. Natalie did not commit sloppy financial crimes. Aaliyah slowly flipped through a bank statement from 3 years ago, her face giving absolutely nothing away. "Harold," Aaliyah said, her voice exceptionally steady and precise. "You are asking me to draft a federal lawsuit claiming your daughter embezzled funds to steal your real estate. But to file an emergency injunction and freeze her assets, I need documented proof of the stolen transfers. These are just outdated account summaries. Where are the current ledger statements?" The proof is that she bought the deed. Harold shouted, the veins bulging visibly in his neck. She used my money from the joint account. Just file the injunction, Aaliyah. You are family. You need to protect us from this thief. Aaliyah looked up from the folder. She looked at her husband Brandon, who quickly averted his eyes to stare at the floor. She looked at her mother-in-law Beatrice, who was dramatically dabbing non-existent tears with a silk tissue. Aaliyah closed the folder with a sharp, decisive snap. She had always suspected that the Sullivans' immense generational wealth was nothing but a fragile, heavily leveraged illusion. Now seeing the sheer, unadulterated panic in Harold's eyes, her suspicions crystallized into absolute certainty. She realized they were not victims. They were cornered rats trying to use her law license and her professional reputation as a weapon to cover up their own financial incompetence. I will review these documents at my office, Aaliyah said smoothly, keeping her tone strictly professional to avoid triggering another narcissistic outburst. If there is a legitimate case for corporate fraud here, I will find it. Aaliyah turned on her heel and walked out the heavy front doors without waiting for a response. She strode down the driveway and got into her car. Once the doors were locked, she tossed Harold's pathetic folder onto the passenger seat. She did not call her paralegal to draft a lawsuit against Natalie. Instead, she opened her phone, navigated to her secure messaging app, and pulled up Natalie's contact. Aaliyah knew exactly who the real criminals were in this family, and she was absolutely not going down with a sinking ship. The text message illuminated the screen of my phone just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee the following morning. It was from Aaliyah. The message was brief, devoid of any familial warmth, and strictly professional. Meet me at the Vault Coffee Roasters in the Loop at 9 o'clock. Come alone. Bring your corporate documentation for the LLC. We need to talk. I stared at the glowing text, a familiar knot of defensive tension tightening in my stomach. I knew Aaliyah was a powerhouse corporate litigator. I knew Harold would immediately run to her demanding she use her high-powered law firm to crush me into submission. If she was asking for the LLC documentation, it meant Harold had already spun his web of lies, painting me as a rogue, embezzling daughter who had somehow stolen the family estate. I packed my briefcase, sliding in the ironclad legal paperwork, proving my completely lawful purchase of the defaulted mortgage debt. I was ready for a brutal legal battle. I was ready to fight my own sister-in-law. The Vault Coffee Roasters was an upscale, dimly lit cafe favored by downtown executives. The rain was slicking the Chicago streets as I walked in, folding my umbrella and scanning the room. Aaliyah was already seated in a secluded leather booth at the very back. She wore a flawless navy blue tailored suit, looking every bit the ruthless attorney she was known to be. A plain black espresso sat untouched in front of her. She did not smile when she saw me approach. I slid into the booth opposite her, placing my heavy leather briefcase squarely on the polished wooden table. I did not bother ordering a drink. I wanted to get straight to the point. If Harold sent you here to serve me with a preliminary injunction, you can just slide the papers across the table. I stated, my voice cold and unwavering. But I highly recommend you review the LLC documents in my briefcase before you risk your firm's reputation on a frivolous lawsuit. Vanguard National Bank sold that distressed asset legally. Harold defaulted for 2 years. He has absolutely no legal standing, and you know it. Aaliyah did not flinch. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her espresso, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me pause. She set the cup down precisely on its saucer. Harold did demand that I file an emergency injunction to freeze your assets by 5 o'clock today. Aaliyah said, her voice smooth and impeccably controlled. He handed me a chaotic pile of outdated bank statements and screamed that you had committed federal wire fraud. He expects me to act as his personal attack dog to bully you into handing the deed over to him. I narrowed my eyes, keeping my hand resting on the handle of my briefcase. And yet, you are sitting here with me, instead of filing motions at the courthouse. Why? Because I am an officer of the court, Natalie. I deal in fax ledgers and verified timelines, Aaliyah replied. I do not deal in the narcissistic delusions of a failed real estate developer who cannot even balance a basic checkbook. I took one look at his pathetic excuse for a financial portfolio and knew immediately that you did not steal anything. You executed a perfectly legal distressed asset acquisition. It was brilliant, actually. I commend your strategy. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. The defensive tension in my shoulders dropped a fraction. You are not going to sue me. I am not going to sue you, Aaliyah confirmed. In fact, I am not going to represent Harold, Beatrice, or Brandon in any capacity regarding this matter. She reached down to the floor beside her and lifted a massive, heavily tabbed legal binder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. It was exponentially thicker and far more organized than the messy stack of papers I had seen Harold holding in the past. She slid the massive folder across the table until it rested directly in front of me. I looked at the thick spine of the binder, then back up at her. What is this? That is my exit strategy, Aaliyah stated firmly. And it is your ultimate vindication. I opened the heavy cover. The first page was a detailed financial audit, but it was not about my trust account. It was a comprehensive breakdown of Brandon's personal finances, his supposed business ventures, and the joint accounts he shared with Aaliyah. I have spent the last 3 years playing the role of the supportive, successful wife to your brother. Aaliyah began leaning forward slightly, her professional facade giving way to a raw, simmering anger. When I married into the Sullivan family, Harold and Beatrice played their parts perfectly. They acted like old money royalty. They welcomed me with open arms, bragging to their country club friends about their brilliant, Ivy League-educated African-American daughter-in-law. They loved the optics. They loved how I elevated their progressive, successful family brand. Aaliyah pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the open binder. But I am an auditor of truth, Natalie. I started noticing the discrepancies 6 months into the marriage. Brandon would constantly ask me to cover his half of the mortgage on our luxury condo, claiming his capital was temporarily tied up in aggressive family startup ventures. He drove that Porsche, wore designer suits, and acted like a venture capitalist, yet he never once produced a legitimate tax return showing a single dollar of net profit. I flipped to the next tab in the binder, my eyes scanning the highlighted bank transfers. I know exactly where his capital was coming from, I said quietly. It was coming from my paycheck. Aaliyah nodded, her expression hardening. Exactly. 2 months ago, I finally pulled a comprehensive credit report on my own husband. I bypassed his lies and went straight to the data. I discovered that Brandon has zero equity in any of his businesses. He has hundreds of thousands of dollars in hidden personal debt. Every single one of his lifestyle expenses was being seeded by that joint family trust account, an account funded entirely by your labor. We locked eyes across the table. In that quiet coffee shop, the profound weight of our shared reality settled over us. We were two incredibly driven, highly successful women who had spent years grinding and demanding corporate careers only to be systematically bled dry by a family of entitled, mediocre men and an enabling, manipulative mother. They drained me dry, Aaliyah. I admitted the lingering exhaustion of the last decade finally creeping into my voice. For 10 years, I was their retirement plan. I was their slush fund. I was their emergency parachute. Every time I tried to set a boundary, Beatrice would manufacture a medical crisis, and Harold would threaten to disown me. They used my love and my sense of duty to finance their fake suburban empire. They targeted me for the exact same reason they exploited you, Aaliyah said, her voice dropping to a fierce, unrelenting whisper. They thought because I am a successful black woman who married into their supposedly prestigious white family, I would be so blindingly grateful for the social elevation that I would blindly finance their facade. They expected me to step in as the new family ATM the moment you finally burned out and cut the cord. Yesterday, when Harold ordered me to use my hard-earned law license to destroy you and cover up his financial ruins, he proved exactly what I was to them. I am not a daughter-in-law. I am a tool. I am a shield. And I refuse to be utilized by parasites. I looked down at the binder again, flipping past Brandon's disastrous credit score to the next section. The tabs here were labeled with ominous legal terms: fraudulent conveyance, predatory lending, forged signatures. What is in this section? I asked, tracing my finger over the red tabs. Aaliyah took a deep breath, her posture going rigid. When I realized the extent of Brandon's lies, I dug deeper into Harold and Beatrice's recent financial activities. I knew your father was desperate for cash flow since his real estate business basically collapsed 4 years ago. He has been searching for alternative funding sources because traditional banks will not even look at him anymore. Aaliyah tapped the page I was currently viewing. I discovered this last week. Harold and Brandon are drowning. Your decision to lock your paycheck did not just inconvenience them, it triggered a catastrophic margin call on their secret debts. They are currently negotiating a massive high-interest loan with a notoriously aggressive shadow lender operating out of the city. We are talking about loan sharks dressed in tailored suits. My blood ran completely cold. A shadow lender. Harold is borrowing money from criminals. Aaliyah nodded grimly. Yes. But it gets worse, Natalie. Look at the collateral section of that loan application. I turned the page. My eyes scanned the blurry photocopy of a highly irregular lending agreement. The loan amount was for $250,000. The collateral listed was a commercial property Harold had falsely claimed he still owned. But that was not what made my heart stop. At the bottom of the guarantor page, right below Harold's scrawled signature, was my own name, Natalie Sullivan. And next to my printed name was a signature that looked remarkably similar to mine, but the loop on the N was just slightly off. They forged my signature again. I whispered, feeling a wave of absolute nausea wash over me. Beatrice did it for the mortgage 3 years ago, and now Harold is doing it to secure $250,000 from loan sharks. Aaliyah leaned across the table. They are preparing to submit that finalized paperwork by the end of the week. They are going to use your pristine credit profile and your high income status to secure a desperate predatory loan that they will inevitably default on. When they default, those lenders will not go after Harold's empty pockets. They will come straight for your tech salary and your new penthouse. They are trying to chain you to their sinking ship permanently. I stared at the forged signature, my previous sense of victory completely evaporating. Locking my bank accounts and buying the house was not enough. They were actively trying to destroy my future behind my back. They were relentless. What do we do? I asked, looking up at Aaliyah. The dynamic between us had fundamentally shifted. We were no longer simply in-laws. We were a united front against a common enemy. We let them walk right into a trap of their own making. Aaliyah said, her eyes flashing with a sharp, terrifying brilliance. I am preparing to file for a brutal, highly publicized divorce from Brandon. But I am not filing it today. I want to wait until they are completely exposed. I want to wait until they have nowhere left to hide. I closed the heavy binder, pulling it securely toward my chest. I have the house. I set a new dangerous plan formulating in my mind. They think they are going to fix everything with this forged loan, but they do not realize the eviction clock is already ticking. Aaliyah smiled, a genuine predatory smile. You have the property leverage, and I have the legal insight. They think I am back at the office drafting a lawsuit against you. Let us let them believe they still have the upper hand. You need to play the part of the guilt-ridden daughter who is willing to negotiate. Draw them out into the open. I nodded slowly, the pieces of the ultimate payoff aligning perfectly. Harold and Beatrice's 40th wedding anniversary is this weekend, I stated. Harold sent out invitations to half the country club before I cut off his funds. He is planning a massive catered event to prove to his friends that he is still successful. Aaliyah picked up her espresso cup, raising it slightly in the air. Then I suggest you attend that party, Natalie. Bring your projector, bring your documents. Let us give Harold Sullivan the grand audience he has always wanted. I kept my eyes glued to the forged signature on the heavily redacted loan application resting inside Aaliyah's binder. The initial shock was rapidly cooling into a hardened, calculated fury. I traced the outline of the ink with my eyes, noticing the slight hesitation in the curve of the letter N. It was a remarkably good forgery, far better than Beatrice's sloppy attempt on the mortgage documents 3 years ago. This took practice. This took dedicated, malicious intent. Who actually signed this? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Harold does not have the patience to practice my signature, and Beatrice's hands shake too much from her morning wine. Aaliyah leaned back against the leather booth. her dark eyes flashing with absolute disgust. Brandon. Your brother spent all of Tuesday afternoon locked in his home office. He claimed he was working on a new logo design for his imaginary restaurant franchise. In reality, he was using a digital tracing pad to perfectly replicate your signature from an old Christmas card you gave him. He digitized it, smoothed out the vector lines, and printed a master copy to practice tracing over. I found the discarded practice sheets buried at the bottom of our recycling bin. I felt a sickening twist in my stomach. Brandon. The brother I had practically raised, the brother whose luxury car I had financed, whose debts I had cleared time and time again. He was not just a lazy, entitled dependent. He was an active, willing participant in a felony designed to ruin my life. They are submitting this to a private equity group called Obsidian Capital. Aaliyah continued, tapping the top of the loan document. Calling them a lending institution is a gross overstatement. They are predators. They specifically target desperate real estate developers who have been blacklisted by federal banks. They offer massive uncollateralized cash injections with exorbitant borderline illegal interest rates. But they require an ironclad guarantor. Someone with a flawless credit history and a verifiable high-income corporate salary. Me, I stated flatly. Exactly. Aaliyah nodded. Harold is putting up a fake deed for a commercial strip mall he actually lost to the bank in 2018. The lender knows the collateral is shaky, so they demanded a pristine cosigner. Beatrice dug through her old files and provided them with your last 3 W-2 forms, your social security number, and your employer identification data. They packaged you up and offered you as the sacrificial lamb to secure $250,000 in quick cash. If this loan goes through, I said, calculating the sheer scale of the disaster, and they immediately default on those payments, Obsidian Capital will not waste time calling Harold. They will bypass him entirely. They will slap a lien on my new penthouse. They will garnish my wages at the tech firm. They could freeze my legitimate bank accounts. They would utterly destroy your financial existence before you even knew the loan existed. Aaliyah confirmed, her voice devoid of any sympathy for her own husband's family. Harold and Brandon knew exactly what they were doing. They knew this shadow lender would come for your throat, not theirs. They simply did not care. They consider your assets to be their rightful property. I looked up at Aaliyah, studying the sharp, uncompromising lines of her face. The Sullivan family was a den of vipers, but Aaliyah was a completely different breed. She was a top-tier corporate litigator who commanded respect in courtrooms filled with ruthless executives. I could not fathom how Harold thought he could slip a fraudulent, highly illegal federal loan application past a woman who prosecuted financial crimes for a living. Why did Harold bring this to you? I asked, genuinely baffled by my father's supreme arrogance. He has to know you would spot the forgery. He has to know this is a massive criminal liability. Why risk showing this to a lawyer? Aaliyah let out a short, humorless laugh. It was a dry, hollow sound that carried years of suppressed resentment. She picked up her espresso cup, swirling the dark liquid before setting it back down. Because Harold Sullivan is a textbook narcissist blinded by his own privilege. Aaliyah said, her voice dropping to a fierce, unrelenting whisper. He brought this to me because Obsidian Capital requires all guarantor signatures to be notarized and legally verified by an independent attorney. Harold did not want to risk a stranger asking too many questions. So he came to me demanding I use my notary stamp and my firm's letterhead to rubber stamp this fraudulent nightmare. She leaned across the table, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that demanded my absolute attention. They thought I would cover for them because I am the only Black woman married into this house. They thought I needed their acceptance. Aaliyah stated, every single word landing with the weight of a judge's gavel. For 3 years, Harold and Beatrice have paraded me around their country club like a diversity trophy. They introduced me to their wealthy, snobbish friends to prove how progressive and modern the Sullivan family is. They smiled at my face while making passive-aggressive comments about my hair, my ambition, and my background behind closed doors. They operated on the deeply racist, arrogant assumption that I should be so blindingly grateful to be a part of their supposedly prestigious, wealthy white family that I would sacrifice my own moral compass to protect them. Aaliyah placed her hands flat on the legal binder, her posture radiating absolute authority. They thought I would blindly sign away my law license, my ethics, and my entire career just to keep my seat at their mahogany dining table. They thought my desire to belong to their suburban empire would override my intelligence. But I am an officer of the law, Natalie. I swore an oath. I protect the truth. I do not protect thieves, and I certainly do not protect a family of parasitic frauds who view me as nothing more than a convenient legal shield. A heavy, profound silence fell over our corner of the coffee shop. The rain lashed against the large glass windows beside us, masking the ambient noise of the other patrons. I looked at this brilliant, fierce woman who had been dragged into my family's toxic orbit, and I felt a deep, undeniable sense of solidarity. We were two incredibly capable women whom Harold Sullivan had desperately tried to reduce to mere instruments for his own survival. He had severely miscalculated. "So what did you tell him?" I asked, breaking the silence. "When he handed you the forged documents, what did you say?" I played the role of the dutiful, obedient daughter-in-law. Aaliyah replied, a cold, predatory smile playing on her lips. "I told Harold that Obsidian Capital's terms were highly complex and that I needed the weekend to thoroughly review the lending clauses before I could officially apply my notary stamp. I told him I wanted to ensure he was getting the best possible interest rate." His ego ate it right up. He actually patted me on the head and told me I was finally acting like a real team player. "You bought us time." I realized the strategic brilliance of her maneuver becoming clear. "I bought us until Monday morning," Aaliyah corrected. "Harold believes I am bringing the fully notarized, legally binding paperwork to his 40th anniversary party this Saturday night. He is planning to sign the final authorization in front of Brandon and Beatrice as a grand gesture of his triumphant return to the real estate game. He thinks he has won. He thinks he has secured $250,000 using your stolen identity, and he is going to celebrate it in front of all his country club friends." I looked back down at the binder, my mind racing through the logistics of the upcoming weekend. The anniversary party was going to be a lavish, catered affair hosted in the grand ballroom of the very country club that had just suspended Harold's membership. I knew Harold well enough to know he would manipulate, threaten, or lie his way back into that ballroom just to maintain appearances for one more night. He would use the promise of the incoming Obsidian Capital loan to secure the venue. Aaliyah closed the binder and slid it firmly across the polished wood until it rested against my hands. "I am giving you my entire audit, Natalie," Aaliyah said softly, but with absolute conviction. "Every bank statement, every forged document, every piece of evidence proving Harold, Beatrice, and Brandon are engaged in federal wire fraud, identity theft, and predatory financial conspiracy. This binder is a loaded weapon." I placed my hands on top of the leather cover, feeling the immense weight of the evidence beneath my palms. "What are you going to do during the party?" "I am going to stand right next to my husband," Aaliyah replied, her eyes gleaming with cold, calculated anticipation. "I am going to stand there looking beautiful and supportive while you walk up to that microphone. I am going to watch Harold Sullivan realize that the black daughter-in-law he underestimated and the biological daughter he exploited have completely dismantled his empire. And when the dust settles, I am serving Brandon with divorce papers so airtight he will not be able to afford a bus ticket out of Chicago." I picked up the heavy binder and slid it carefully into my briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut. The satisfying click echoed in the quiet booth. "I will see you on Saturday, Aaliyah," I said, picking up my umbrella and standing up from the table. "I need to go buy a new dress. If I am going to burn my father's kingdom to the ground, I want to look my absolute best doing it." The text message to Harold needed to be a masterpiece of calculated groveling. I sat at my sleek marble kitchen island, the cold glass of my Pinot Noir sweating slightly against the coaster. Aaliyah's binder lay open before me, its pages a roadmap to my family's total financial annihilation. But before the execution, there had to be the setup. I had to feed Harold's ego exactly what it craved: submission. I picked up my phone and stared at his blocked contact. With a slow exhale, I unblocked him and began to type, "Dad." The first word was the hardest to write, tasting like ash even in my mind. I've had time to think. I panicked. The pressure at work has been immense and I lashed out. "You were right about the house. I shouldn't have gone behind your back. I know how much the country club and your reputation mean to you. I want to make things right. I'm incredibly sorry for the disrespect. Let's talk." I hit send and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID flashed Harold Sullivan. I let it ring 3 times, taking a steadying breath before answering, infusing my voice with just the right amount of remorseful hesitation. "Hello," I said softly. "Natalie." Harold's voice boomed through the speaker, dripping with a sickening blend of triumph and condescension. "It's about time you came to your senses. I knew you'd realize how ridiculous you were being. You don't just turn your back on family. You don't just bite the hand that fed you." "I know, Dad," I replied, staring blankly at the wall, visualizing the forged loan application in Aaliyah's binder. I let my emotions get the better of me. The stress. It just boiled over. "Stress is no excuse for disrespecting your father in his own home." Harold snapped the reprimand swift and expected. "Your mother has been inconsolable, and Brandon is devastated about the car. You've caused a massive disruption, Natalie. You have a lot of making up to do." "I want to fix it," I said, injecting a slight tremor into my voice. "I really do. I know I handled the situation with the mortgage poorly. I should have discussed the foreclosure buyout with you first instead of acting unilaterally." Harold scoffed. "You think? You undermined my authority as the head of this household. But I'm a forgiving man. I understand the corporate world can be taxing on young women. You lost your head. We can move past this, but it's going to require more than just an apology. The accounts need to be unlocked immediately, and we need to discuss a substantial transfer to cover the damages you've caused this week." I anticipated the demand for immediate cash. I had the counteroffer ready. "Dad, I can't unlock the old accounts right now. There's a complication with the bank fraud alert I triggered. It's going to take a few days to clear the bureaucratic red tape." Harold's breathing hitched audibly over the line. "What do you mean a few days? The country club needs their payment now. Brandon needs his car back now. You need to fix this today." I know. I placated, keeping my tone soothing and compliant. "But the fraud department is investigating the sudden transfer. If I try to reverse it immediately, they might freeze my personal accounts too, pending an audit. It's too risky right now." Silence stretched on the other end. I could almost hear the gears grinding in Harold's head, calculating the risk against his desperate need for capital. "But I have a better idea." I continued smoothly, dropping the bait. "I know this weekend is your and Mom's 40th anniversary party at the club." "Yes, it is," Harold said, his tone instantly guarded. "Assuming I can resolve the situation with Caldwell before Saturday, which you have made exceedingly difficult, I'm going to resolve it. I promised. I have a significant performance bonus clearing on Friday. It's substantial, more than enough to clear the club dues, get Brandon's car back, and provide a very comfortable cushion for the family trust. I want to present it to you and Mom at the anniversary party. A grand gesture to show my commitment to the family. A fresh start." Harold hesitated. The mention of a substantial bonus was the exact trigger I needed. His greed would override his immediate anger. "How substantial are we talking about?" he asked, trying to sound indifferent, but failing miserably. $250,000. I lied effortlessly, matching the exact amount of the fraudulent loan he was attempting to secure with Obsidian Capital. "I want to write you a check for $250,000, in front of everyone, to apologize and to show my dedication to the Sullivan legacy." A sharp intake of breath echoed through the phone. $250,000. Harold repeated, the awe unmistakable. "Yes," I confirmed, "but I need you to hold off on any drastic legal action or alternative funding until then. No emergency loans, no extreme measures. Just give me until Saturday night. Let me make this right publicly. I want to hand you that check myself." Harold was silent for a long moment. He was weighing his options. He had the forged Obsidian Capital loan ready to go, but that was dangerous dirty money with exorbitant interest. A clean, untraceable $250,000 check from his daughter presented in front of his peers was the ultimate victory. It solved his financial crisis and restored his public image in one fell swoop. "All right, Natalie," Harold finally said, his voice regaining its pompous resonance. "I will hold off on taking further action. I will personally assure Caldwell that the situation is being rectified by my daughter this weekend. But you better not be playing games. You show up at the club on Saturday night and you bring that check. If you try to back out, I swear I will make you regret the day you were born." "I will be there, Dad." I promised, a cold smile touching my lips. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'm bringing everything I owe you." We ended the call. I set the phone down and looked back at Aaliyah's binder. Harold took the bait hook, line, and sinker. He believed he had won. He believed he had broken me, that his threats and manipulations had successfully bullied me back into submission. He was expecting a triumphant return to the top of the social ladder, bankrolled by my supposed guilt. I picked up my pen and began finalizing the presentation slides for Saturday night. Harold wanted a grand gesture in front of his country club friends. He wanted a public display of my commitment to the family. He was going to get exactly what he asked for. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the jaws to snap shut. The morning of the 40th anniversary party dawned bright and clear, matching the sheer, unadulterated triumph swelling in Harold's chest. He stood in front of the full-length mirror in his expansive dressing room, carefully adjusting the lapels of a brand-new, impeccably tailored tuxedo. He had charged it to a backup credit card Beatrice had managed to scrape together, entirely confident that Natalie's impending $250,000 check would render the debt irrelevant. Harold smoothed his silver hair and offered his reflection a smug, victorious grin. This was his moment. Today he was not a man hiding from foreclosure or dodging repo men. Today he was Harold Sullivan, the benevolent patriarch, the masterful negotiator, the king reclaiming his throne. Brandon lounged in the velvet armchair across the room, already dressed in a sharp black suit. He was nursing a glass of scotch, though it was barely noon, trying to steady his nerves. The loss of his Porsche still stung, but Harold's assurance of a massive cash influx had temporarily sedated his panic. "I told you, didn't I?" Harold declared, turning to face his son, his voice echoing with absolute arrogance. "I told you she would crack. Natalie is predictable, Brandon. She always has been. She makes a big show of her independence, but at the end of the day she cannot function without this family's approval. She is terrified of being cut off from the Sullivan legacy." Brandon took a sip of his drink, looking slightly less convinced than his father. "I don't know, Dad. She sounded pretty serious when she left." "Are you absolutely sure she's bringing the check tonight? What if she's just stringing us along?" Harold let out a booming, patronizing laugh. He walked over and slapped Brandon heavily on the shoulder. "You need to learn how to read people, son. That is the secret to business. Natalie is a worker bee. She is not a strategist. When I threatened her, she panicked. She knows that without my guidance, her little tech salary means nothing. She realized that throwing away her family over a petty squabble about a mortgage was social suicide. She is coming tonight to beg for forgiveness, and she is bringing $250,000 to prove she means it." Harold walked back to the mirror, adjusting his cufflinks. "And once that check clears on Monday morning, we are going to restructure everything. We will pay off the immediate club dues, get you a better car, and then I am going to have Aaliyah draft a legally binding contract. If Natalie wants to remain part of this family, her salary goes directly into a new trust account that I control entirely. We are not playing these games with her again." Brandon nodded slowly, the prospect of a new car finally erasing the last of his doubts. "So what about the Obsidian Capital loan? Are we still submitting it?" Harold waved his hand dismissively. "Obsidian is our backup plan. If Natalie's check somehow falls short, or if she tries to negotiate the amount, we still have the forged application ready to go. Aaliyah promised to bring the notarized documents tonight. We hold all the cards, Brandon. We have the cash coming in the front door, and we have a $250,000 safety net waiting at the back door. It is foolproof." Downstairs, the house was a flurry of chaotic preparation. Beatrice was directing a team of florists, screaming at them to ensure the white roses matched the exact shade of her custom gown. She was operating on a frantic, manic energy, desperate to project the image of a blissfully happy matriarch. She had spent the last 3 days telling everyone who would listen that her brilliant, successful daughter was flying in a special guest to present a major financial gift for their anniversary. The lie had grown so elaborate that Beatrice almost believed it herself. Harold descended the grand staircase, pausing at the landing to admire his domain. The polished marble, the sweeping architecture, the sheer scale of the mansion, it all belonged to him again. Natalie may have bought the deed in secret, but tonight he was going to force her to transfer it back into his name. He was going to use the audience at the country club to corner her, leveraging her fear of public embarrassment to secure total compliance. He pulled his phone from his pocket and checked the time. 6 hours until the party. 6 hours until his ultimate victory. He typed out a quick commanding text message to me. "We are arriving at the club at 7. Do not be late, Natalie, and remember what we discussed." Harold hit send, a predatory smile stretching across his face. He felt invincible. He felt like a titan of industry who had just executed a flawless hostile takeover. He had no idea that the empire he was so proudly surveying was already rigged with explosives, and I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to hand him the detonator. The text message flashed on my phone screen as I sat in the back of my hired town car, pulling up to the gated entrance of the Oakbrook Country Club. I read Harold's commanding words one last time, locked my screen, and dropped the phone into my leather tote bag. Nestled right beside it was my sleek silver laptop and the heavy legal binder Aaliyah had given me. The country club was exactly as ostentatious as Harold always demanded. Valets in crisp white shirts rushed to open doors for Chicago's local elite. I stepped out of the car, smoothing down the skirt of my emerald green designer suit. I looked nothing like the exhausted, financially drained daughter who had fled their house days ago. I looked like a woman who owned the building. I walked through the grand mahogany doors and followed the sound of a live string quartet toward the main ballroom. Harold had spared absolutely no expense for this 40th anniversary party, entirely on the delusion that my money was going to cover the bill. The ballroom was draped in cascading white silk and towering floral arrangements of imported orchids. Waiters navigated through the crowd of nearly 200 guests carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne and beluga caviar. It was a breathtaking monument to financial fraud. I paused near the entrance, letting my eyes adjust to the glittering chandelier light, and immediately spotted the key players. Harold was holding court near the center of the room, a glass of scotch in one hand and a premium cigar in the other. He was surrounded by the exact men he was desperate to impress. I recognized Gregory Walsh, a prominent commercial banker, and Richard Sterling, Richard Belmont, a notoriously ruthless real estate investor. Harold was laughing loudly, slapping Belmont on the shoulder, projecting the image of a titan of industry who had not a single care in the world. A few feet away, Beatrice was working her own crowd of wealthy suburban socialites. She wore a glittering silver gown that I knew for a fact was charged to a maxed-out credit card, hovering dangerously close to default. She was smiling brightly, touching the diamond necklace at her throat, playing the role of the cherished, adored matriarch to absolute perfection. Brandon was hovering near the open bar, desperately trying to impress a group of younger corporate associates. I could hear snippets of his conversation floating over the jazz music. He was casually claiming his Porsche Panamera was currently at an exclusive auto shop getting a custom matte black vinyl wrap, a pathetic lie to cover up the humiliating reality of its repossession. And then there was Aaliyah. She stood slightly apart from her husband, holding a glass of sparkling water. She wore a stunning, form-fitting burgundy gown that contrasted beautifully with her dark skin, looking like absolute royalty amidst a sea of suburban pretenders. She scanned the room with the cool, calculating gaze of a predator observing its trapped prey. When her eyes finally found me, standing by the entrance, she did not smile. She simply gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. The alliance was holding strong. I took a deep breath, gripped the handles of my tote bag, and stepped fully into the light. It did not take long for Harold to spot me. His eyes darted over the heads of his wealthy friends and locked onto my figure. For a split second, I saw the raw, unfiltered panic of a drowning man flashing across his face. He checked my hands, his gaze dropping instantly to the heavy leather bag hanging from my shoulder. He saw the bag, and his arrogant smirk returned in full force. He believed the $250,000 check was sitting right inside it. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Harold announced loudly to the bankers surrounding him. "My guest of honor has just arrived." He strode across the ballroom floor, his chest puffed out with victorious pride. He did not hug me. He did not ask how I was doing. He simply leaned in close, the smell of expensive scotch and cheap desperation washing over me. "You brought it," Harold demanded in a low, harsh whisper, keeping his perfect smile plastered on his face for the benefit of the watching crowd. "Every single penny I owe you is right here in this bag," I replied, matching his fake smile effortlessly. "Good girl," Harold murmured, his eyes gleaming with greedy triumph. "We are doing the speeches right now. You play your part perfectly, Natalie, and I might just forgive your little stunt from earlier this week." Harold turned away before I could respond and marched directly toward the small stage set up at the front of the ballroom. A massive projector screen hung behind the podium, currently displaying a looping slideshow of heavily edited smiling photographs of Harold and Beatrice over the last 40 years. "Ladies and gentlemen, family and esteemed colleagues," Harold's voice boomed over the microphone, silencing the string quartet and drawing the attention of every single guest in the room. "If I could have your attention for just a moment." The crowd fell silent, turning toward the stage. Beatrice glided gracefully up the steps to stand beside her husband, linking her arm through his. Brandon moved to the front row of the audience, Aaliyah stepping up quietly right beside him. 40 years. Harold began, his voice dripping with practiced emotion. 40 years of marriage, of building a legacy, of weathering the storms of business and life. Beatrice and I have built an empire here in Chicago. But as any successful man in this room will tell you, true wealth is not measured by the properties you own or the deals you close. It is measured by family. A murmur of polite, appreciative applause rippled through the ballroom. "We have always demanded excellence from our children." Harold continued, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed squarely on me. "We pushed them hard. We expected greatness. And sometimes the pressure of the corporate world can cause a temporary disconnect. We all lose our way sometimes. We all let the stress cloud our judgment." He paused dramatically, placing a hand over his heart. He was painting my financial rebellion as a mere mental breakdown, a temporary lapse in sanity that required his benevolent forgiveness. But a strong family always finds its way back to each other. Harold's voice rose, filling the grand room with artificial warmth. "Tonight is not just about celebrating 40 years of marriage. Tonight is a reunion. My brilliant daughter Natalie, a senior executive in the financial technology sector, has returned to us. She has realized that everything she is, everything she has achieved is because of the foundation her mother and I provided." Harold extended his hand toward me, his smile wide and predatory. He was trapping me socially, forcing me to play the role of the repentant, grateful child in front of every major banker and investor in the city. "She has come here tonight to make a grand gesture," Harold announced, his greed now bleeding visibly into his words. "She has come to show her profound appreciation for the Sullivan family legacy. Natalie, sweetheart, please come up here. The floor is yours." The spotlight swung directly onto me. 200 wealthy guests turned in unison, clapping politely, waiting to witness the prodigal daughter hand over a fortune to her loving father. I looked at Harold, standing on the stage with his hand outstretched, waiting for his salvation. I looked at Beatrice, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. I looked at Aaliyah in the front row, her dark eyes completely unblinking. I gripped my leather tote bag, feeling the sharp, heavy edges of my laptop and the legal binder inside. "I would be happy to take the floor, Harold," I whispered to myself. I kept my head held high, my posture absolute steel, and I began the long, steady walk toward the stage. I was not walking up there to hand him a check. I was walking up there to hand him his execution. The click of my heels against the polished marble stairs sounded like a ticking clock. I ascended the steps to the stage, the spotlight tracking my every movement. Harold stood by the podium, his smile so wide it looked painful. He extended his right hand toward me, his palm open, fully expecting me to place $250,000 check right into it. Beatrice stood slightly behind him, dabbing her dry eyes, ready to play the overwhelmed, grateful mother for the country club audience. I reached the podium. I did not take Harold's hand. I did not even look at him. I simply set my heavy leather tote bag down on the wooden surface and unclasped the brass lock. Harold's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a harsh, demanding whisper meant only for my ears. "Give me the envelope, Natalie. Hand it over right now and smile for the cameras." I ignored him entirely. I reached into my bag and pulled out my sleek silver laptop. I flipped the screen open. The glow illuminated my face as I quickly typed in my password. Next to the podium, a standard audiovisual cable rested on a small table connected directly to the massive overhead projector that was currently displaying a slideshow of my parents smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower. "What are you doing?" Harold hissed, his eyes darting nervously toward the front row where his wealthy friends were watching intently. "Put the computer away." I picked up the cable and plugged it firmly into the side of my laptop. "Good evening, everyone," I said, leaning into the sleek black microphone attached to the podium. My voice boomed through the grand ballroom, instantly silencing the lingering whispers of the crowd. The string quartet had already stopped playing. 200 pairs of eyes were locked onto me. "My father just spoke to you about building an empire." I continued, my tone perfectly measured, radiating the absolute confidence of a corporate executive leading a board meeting. He spoke about legacy, about the foundation of the Sullivan family, and about the grand financial gesture I came here to make tonight. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the audience. I saw Gregory Walsh, the commercial banker Harold was desperately trying to secure a loan from, leaning forward in his chair. I saw Richard Belmont, the ruthless real estate investor, swirling his scotch with a look of mild curiosity. In the front row, Brandon looked confused. Right beside him, Aaliyah stood perfectly still, her eyes locked onto the massive screen behind me. "Harold is absolutely right," I announced clearly. "I did come here tonight to discuss the Sullivan family portfolio, but to truly appreciate the magnitude of this family's wealth, we must first examine the actual foundation it was built upon." I pressed a single button on my laptop keyboard. Behind me, the romantic photograph of Harold and Beatrice vanished. The projector screen flashed a brilliant, blinding white, casting a harsh glare over the entire stage. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom as a massive, meticulously detailed Excel spreadsheet appeared on the wall. The header was printed in bold, undeniable black text: "The Sullivan Family Portfolio, funded entirely by Natalie Sullivan." Harold turned around to look at the screen. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked as if he might pass out. His jaw dropped open. Beatrice let out a sharp, genuine shriek, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. "What is this?" Harold demanded, his voice cracking over the microphone as he lunged toward the podium. "Turn that off right now." I stepped firmly in front of the laptop, blocking his reach, and grabbed the microphone stand. "As you can see on the screen," I said, my voice cutting through Harold's panic like a surgical scalpel, "I have categorized the family's operational expenses over the last 10 years. Let us start with the first column in red. This represents Harold Sullivan's professional and social expenditures." I pointed to the massive screen behind me. The spreadsheet was flawless. It listed dates, exact monetary amounts, and specific vendors. "Over the last 4 years, my father has not closed a single commercial real estate deal," I stated, projecting my voice to the very back of the room. "Yet he has maintained his gold-tier membership at this exact country club. He has purchased custom-tailored suits, imported cigars, and hosted lavish dinners to project the image of a titan of industry. The total cost of Harold's social facade over the past decade is $342,000. Every single penny of that was drafted directly from my personal tech salary." The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of whispers. Gregory Walsh set his drink down on a nearby table, his eyes narrowing as he read the numbers on the screen. Richard Belmont leaned back in his chair, a look of profound disgust crossing his features. The illusion was shattering right in front of their eyes. "Natalie, stop this right now!" Beatrice cried out from the stage, her voice trembling with genuine terror. She tried to grab my arm, but I smoothly stepped out of her reach. "This is a joke, everyone. She is just pulling a prank, a terrible, tasteless corporate roast." "It is not a roast, Beatrice," I replied coldly, pressing the down arrow on my keyboard. The spreadsheet scrolled smoothly to the next section highlighted in a bright glaring blue. "Let us look at the blue column," I announced to the captivated audience. This section outlines the charitable and social endeavors of Beatrice Sullivan. My mother loves to host charity galas and attend luxury luncheons. Unfortunately, she funded these events by illegally opening 3 premium credit cards using my social security number without my consent. She maxed them out on designer gowns, spa retreats, and vacations, leaving me to pay the minimum balances just to protect my own credit score. Total amount stolen through identity theft over 5 years is $187,000. A sharp collective intake of breath echoed through the room. Identity theft was not a petty family squabble. It was a federal crime. The wealthy socialites who had just spent the last hour drinking Beatrice's champagne were now staring at her as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. Beatrice stumbled backward, her hands shaking violently as she stared at the undeniable proof of her crimes projected at 20 feet tall. I hit the down arrow again. A green section filled the screen. "And finally we have my brother Brandon," I said, locking eyes with him in the front row. Brandon was no longer holding his drink. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. Brandon portrays himself as a successful self-made entrepreneur. I continued, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. The green column outlines the reality. I have paid for his luxury apartment rent. I have paid his fraternity dues after he failed out of college. And until yesterday, I was paying the $2,000 monthly lease on his Porsche Panamera, a vehicle that was repossessed this morning because I finally cut off his funding. Total cost of subsidizing a 28-year-old man who refuses to work is $240,000. Brandon's face turned a violent shade of red. He opened his mouth to scream something, but no words came out. The young corporate associates he had been trying to impress at the bar were now looking at him with open mockery. He was totally exposed as a fraud, a parasite living entirely off his sister's labor. Harold was hyperventilating. He grabbed the edge of the podium, his knuckles stark white. "You are lying!" Harold roared, trying to rip the microphone away from me. "These are fabricated numbers. You are a hysterical, ungrateful brat trying to ruin my anniversary." I did not let go of the microphone. I simply pressed one final button on my laptop. The spreadsheet vanished. In its place, dozens of high-resolution scanned documents filled the massive screen. They were certified bank statements, cleared checks bearing my signature, and direct deposit routing logs. Every single document highlighted the flow of money from my corporate accounts directly into the Sullivan Joint Trust, and then instantly out to the country club, the luxury car dealerships, and the credit card companies. "The numbers are completely audited, Harold," I said, my voice echoing with devastating finality. "I brought the receipts." I turned back to the audience, sweeping my gaze across the silent, shocked faces of Chicago's elite. For 10 years, I was told that family means sacrifice. I said, the heavy weight of a decade of financial abuse pouring into every word. I was told that I owed this family my life, my credit score, and my future. When I finally decided to lock my own bank accounts 2 days ago, my father did not ask if I was okay. He threw a credit card at my head and screamed, "What did you do to our money?" I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the absolute humiliation sink deep into Harold's bones. "The grand total is displayed at the bottom of the ledger," I announced. $1,245,678. That is the exact amount I have paid to maintain the illusion that Harold Sullivan is a successful man. I looked at Harold, who was trembling so violently his tuxedo jacket was vibrating. He looked utterly broken, stripped of all his arrogant power. He was nothing more than a desperate beggar in a rented suit. "You asked me to come here tonight to bring you $250,000. I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, lethal whisper that carried perfectly through the microphone. "You wanted a grand gesture to prove my commitment to the Sullivan legacy." I reached down and disconnected the cable from my laptop. The projector screen behind me went completely black, plunging the stage back into normal lighting. The sudden absence of the glaring numbers felt like the dropping of a guillotine blade. I closed my laptop and slid it back into my leather tote bag. I looked Harold straight in the eyes. "Consider the last 10 years my grand gesture, Harold," I said clearly. "The Bank of Natalie is permanently closed. I am not giving you another dime." The ballroom was dead silent. Nobody clapped. Nobody whispered. The heavy, suffocating reality of Harold Sullivan's absolute ruin hung in the air like thick smoke. I had not just refused to give him money. I had systematically destroyed his reputation, his credibility, and his entire social standing in front of every single person he needed to survive. He was financially and socially dead, but I was not finished yet. The spreadsheet was only the opening act. The real execution was sitting right inside my bag, waiting to be delivered. I looked out at the sea of pale, horrified faces. The heavy silence was thick enough to cut with a knife. Harold stood frozen near the edge of the stage, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and unfocused. Beatrice had collapsed into a chair in the front row, sobbing hysterically into her hands. Brandon looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. But I was not done. I had promised a grand gesture, and I was going to deliver. I turned back to my laptop and clicked to the next slide. The screen flashed, and the spreadsheet was replaced by a high-resolution scan of a legal document. The heading was bold and unmistakable. Loan application and guarantor agreement, Obsidian Capital Partners. A collective murmur rippled through the audience. Several of the bankers and investors in the room recognized the name. Obsidian Capital was notorious in Chicago financial circles. They were shadow lenders, predators who preyed on desperate developers and charged exorbitant interest rates. "Let us talk about desperation," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady through the microphone. "When I finally cut off the cash flow 2 days ago, my father did not look for a job. He did not sell his golf clubs. Instead, he turned to Obsidian Capital to secure $250,000 in high-interest debt." I zoomed in on the bottom of the document, highlighting the signature line. Harold needed a guarantor with perfect credit to secure this predatory loan. I continued, my gaze locking onto my father. But he knew I would never agree. So he and my brother Brandon decided to forge my signature. The silence in the ballroom shattered. Gasps of shock and disbelief erupted from every corner. The accusation of forgery, especially concerning a federal loan application, elevated this from a family dispute to a serious criminal offense. "That is a lie!" Harold roared, suddenly finding his voice. His face was a mask of pure desperation and rage. "She is making this up. That document is a fake." "Is it?" I countered calmly. I looked toward the front row, catching Aaliyah's eye. "Aaliyah, would you care to confirm where this document came from?" Aaliyah stood up slowly, her posture perfect, her expression impassive. She smoothed the front of her burgundy gown and turned to face the crowd. "The document on the screen is a verified scan of the loan application Harold Sullivan brought to my office yesterday morning." Aaliyah stated, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a seasoned litigator. "He demanded that I use my notary stamp to validate the guarantor's signature. Upon review, I discovered that the signature was a blatant forgery executed by Brandon Sullivan. As an officer of the court, I retained a copy of the fraudulent document and refused to participate in this criminal conspiracy." The ballroom erupted. The guests were no longer whispering. They were openly staring at Harold and Brandon with expressions of profound disgust and contempt. Harold had tried to use his own daughter-in-law to rubber stamp a felony, and she had just exposed him in front of the entire Chicago elite. Harold stumbled backward, his hand clutching his chest. He looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. Brandon shrank down in his seat, trying to make himself as small as possible. Beatrice's sobs grew louder, a chaotic soundtrack to their absolute ruin. I turned back to the laptop, my fingers hovering over the keys. "There is one final piece of business we need to address tonight," I announced, my voice cutting through the noise. Harold has spent the last 40 years building an illusion of wealth and success. He has hosted countless parties in a mansion he claims to own. But as we have established tonight, the truth is often far more complicated. I clicked to the final slide. The screen displayed a crisp, official legal document bearing the seal of the Cook County Circuit Court. The bold black text across the top read, "Notice of Eviction and Order of Possession." 2 years ago, Harold Sullivan defaulted on his primary mortgage. I explained, my voice ringing with undeniable finality. He missed 9 consecutive payments, and the property entered the final stages of foreclosure. The bank was preparing to seize the estate and sell it at public auction. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the stunned audience. I could not let my family be thrown out on the street. I continued, "So I stepped in. I formed a private LLC, purchased the distressed debt from the bank in its entirety, and assumed ownership of the property. For the last 24 months, I have been the sole legal owner of the Sullivan estate. Harold and Beatrice have been living there entirely rent-free as my guests." The collective gasp from the audience was louder this time. The realization that Harold did not even own the roof over his head was the final devastating blow. "But hospitality has its limits," I stated, my voice turning cold. "When I cut off my financial support, Harold responded with threats, intimidation, and attempted fraud. He proved that he views me not as a daughter, but as a resource to be exploited and discarded." I zoomed in on the bottom of the eviction notice, highlighting the bold, uncompromising text. "Therefore, I have initiated formal eviction proceedings," I announced, looking directly at Harold, Beatrice, and Brandon. "The Cook County Sheriff's Department has approved the order. You have until 8 o'clock on Monday morning to vacate the premises. If you are not gone by then, you will be forcibly removed." The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. The guests were openly pointing and whispering, the veneer of high society politeness completely shattered by the sheer magnitude of the scandal. Harold collapsed into a chair on the stage, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Beatrice was wailing uncontrollably, clinging to Brandon, who looked like a terrified child. I stood at the podium, surveying the wreckage of the Sullivan family empire. The burden I had carried for a decade was finally lifted. The truth was out in the open, undeniable and absolute. I had not just locked my paycheck. I had systematically dismantled their entire illusion of power and control. I reached out and disconnected my laptop from the projector. The massive screen behind me went black, plunging the stage into sudden darkness. I closed my laptop, slid it back into my leather tote bag, and clasped the brass lock shut. "Happy anniversary, Harold," I said, my voice soft but carrying perfectly through the silent ballroom. "The Bank of Natalie is officially closed." The silence in the ballroom was finally broken, not by Harold or Beatrice, but by a sudden violent movement from the front row. Brandon, whose face had transitioned from a pale mask of terror to a dark mottled red, snapped. The humiliation of having his entire lifestyle exposed as a parasitic fraud in front of the very corporate associates he had been desperately trying to impress was too much for his fragile ego to handle. With a guttural yell that sounded more animal than human, Brandon lunged forward. He scrambled over the velvet ropes separating the front row from the stage, his eyes wide and manic, fixated squarely on the projector sitting on the small table next to the podium. "You ruined everything," Brandon screamed, his voice cracking as he sprinted up the marble steps. "You psychotic, jealous liar, I am going to smash that computer into pieces." He raised his arm, his hand curling into a fist, aiming directly for the expensive audiovisual equipment that had just broadcast his absolute ruin. I stood my ground, my hand resting calmly on the edge of the podium, completely unfazed by his pathetic display of aggression. I knew he was not going to reach the projector. I knew exactly who was standing right behind him. Before Brandon could even take another step toward the table, a figure in a stunning burgundy gown stepped seamlessly into his path. Aaliyah moved with the lethal precision of a striking cobra, She reached out her hand, clamping down on Brandon's raised wrist with a grip so tight it made him gasp in sudden pain. Aaliyah did not yell. She did not raise her voice. She simply leaned in close, her dark eyes flashing with a cold, terrifying authority that instantly paralyzed her husband. "Do not even think about it, Brandon." Aaliyah said, her voice dropping to a sharp, menacing whisper that carried through the microphone perfectly. "You are already facing multiple federal charges for wire fraud and identity theft. Do not add destruction of property and assault to the list in a room full of 200 witnesses." Brandon stumbled backward, his bravado instantly evaporating. He looked down at his wrist, then up at his wife, his eyes wide with desperate confusion. "Aaliyah, what are you doing?" Brandon pleaded, his voice dropping to a pathetic whine. "She is lying. She fabricated all those documents. You are a lawyer. You know this is illegal. You have to defend me. Tell them she is crazy." Aaliyah released his wrist, taking a deliberate step back to put physical distance between them. She reached into her elegant designer clutch, her movements slow and deliberate. Every single eye in the ballroom was now locked onto her. The wealthy guests, who had previously whispered about the brilliant, successful African-American lawyer marrying into the prestigious Sullivan family, were now holding their breath, waiting for the final execution. Aaliyah pulled out a thick, neatly folded stack of legal documents printed on heavy cream-colored paper. She held them up, the stark white pages contrasting sharply against the deep burgundy of her gown. "I am not defending you, Brandon," Aaliyah announced, her voice ringing clear and steady across the silent ballroom. "I am divorcing you." The collective gasp from the audience was louder than any reaction to the financial spreadsheet. This was the ultimate social humiliation. The golden child was being publicly discarded by his highly successful wife in front of the entire Chicago elite. "These are fully executed, legally binding divorce papers." Aaliyah continued, turning slightly so the entire room could see the documents in her hand. "They detail exactly how you and your father have spent the last 3 years systematically defrauding your own sister, and how you attempted to use my legal credentials to rubber stamp a highly illegal predatory loan just 48 hours ago." Brandon looked as if all the air had been violently sucked from his lungs. He reached out a trembling hand, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "Aaliyah, please. You cannot do this right now. We are a family. I love you." "Do not insult my intelligence by using that word," Aaliyah countered, her voice laced with absolute disgust. "I married a man I believed was an ambitious, self-made entrepreneur. Instead, I discovered I married a parasite. You have zero equity in any of your imaginary businesses. You have hundreds of thousands of dollars in hidden personal debt. Every single designer suit you wear, every expensive dinner you buy, and the luxury car you used to drive were funded entirely by stealing your sister's paycheck." Aaliyah took a step closer, her posture radiating uncompromising power. "You are not an entrepreneur, Brandon. You are a thief, and I absolutely refuse to remain legally bound to a man or a family engaged in rampant financial fraud." She turned her gaze toward Harold, who was still slumped in a chair on the stage, his face buried in his hands. "And you, Harold," Aaliyah said, her voice dripping with venom. "You paraded me around this country club like a diversity trophy. You thought my desire for your social acceptance would blind me to your incompetence. You thought I would risk my law license and my career to cover up your pathetic, desperate attempt to secure a loan from shadow lenders. You severely miscalculated." Aaliyah turned back to Brandon, shoving the thick stack of divorce papers directly against his chest. Brandon reflexively grabbed them, clutching the documents like a lifeline. "You have 30 days to respond to the filing," Aaliyah stated, her tone turning purely clinical. "But I suggest you spend that time looking for a very good criminal defense attorney. You are going to need one." Brandon stood frozen, staring down at the divorce papers in his hands. His entire carefully constructed reality had completely vaporized. He had no car, no money, no home, and now he had no wife. The wealthy associates he had been trying to impress earlier were looking at him with open mockery and contempt. He was a social pariah, permanently marked as a fraud. Aaliyah did not wait for a response. She turned on her heel, the train of her burgundy gown sweeping across the marble floor. She walked past the podium, giving me a single triumphant nod. I smiled back, an unspoken acknowledgement of our shared victory passing between us. Aaliyah descended the stairs and walked straight out of the grand ballroom, her head held high, leaving the ruined Sullivan Empire burning in her wake. The silence that followed her departure was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. The devastation was total and irreversible. Harold Sullivan's 40th anniversary party had transformed into the most spectacular public execution in the history of the Oakbrook Country Club. I looked down at Harold, still slumped in his chair, a broken, empty shell of a man. I looked at Beatrice weeping uncontrollably in the front row, and I looked at Brandon clutching his divorce papers like a terrified child. "The eviction order stands, Harold," I said, my voice soft but carrying perfectly through the silent room. "You have until 8 o'clock on Monday morning to vacate my property." I picked up my leather tote bag and turned away from the podium. I walked down the marble steps, cutting a path through the stunned, silent crowd of Chicago's elite. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody said a word. The heavy, suffocating weight of my family's toxic expectations was finally gone, replaced by the exhilarating, undeniable rush of absolute freedom. I paused in the grand foyer, the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom swinging shut behind me, but they could not block out the sound of the impending explosion. I did not need to remain in the room to witness the carnage. The suffocating silence I had left in my wake shattered into a deafening roar of outraged whispers, furious shouts, and the undeniable sound of a social empire collapsing into dust. Gregory Walsh, the commercial banker Harold had been aggressively courting all evening, was the first to break ranks. I could hear his booming voice vibrating with pure, unadulterated outrage. He slammed his crystal champagne flute down on a cocktail table with enough force to shatter the delicate stem. The sharp crack echoed over the rising din of the crowd. "You absolute fraud!" Walsh roared, his voice carrying clearly into the hallway. "You sat in my office last Tuesday asking for a massive bridge loan, claiming you had millions tied up in escrow for a new commercial development. You are completely insolvent. You have been using my institution to float your pathetic lifestyle." Richard Belmont, the notoriously ruthless real estate investor, did not shout. He was far more dangerous than that. He marched directly up to the edge of the stage, pointing a manicured finger at Harold's trembling, pathetic form. "The $50,000 you borrowed from me last month for that phantom zoning permit, Harold?" Belmont stated, his voice a low, lethal growl that cut through the noise. "I want it wired back to my account by tomorrow morning, or my attorneys will file a lien against whatever hidden assets you actually have left. And believe me, I will find them." Suddenly, the fragile illusion of high society politeness completely evaporated. The Oakbrook Country Club ballroom transformed from an elegant anniversary celebration into a vicious, bloodthirsty collection agency. Men and women in tailored suits and expensive designer gowns began crowding the stage, their faces twisted with anger and betrayal. They realized they had not just been lied to, they had been conned by a man who was using their money to pretend he was one of them. "What about the $20,000 you owe me for the charity gala underwriting?" a prominent socialite shrieked, pointing her jewel-encrusted finger directly at Beatrice. "You told me it was a temporary liquidity issue because your funds were tied up in an overseas trust. You bought that silver dress with my money." Harold tried to stand up. He raised his hands in a desperate, frantic attempt to placate the angry mob of his former peers. "Please, everyone, just calm down," Harold pleaded, but his voice lacked its usual booming, arrogant authority. It was a weak, trembling squeak. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding. My daughter is emotionally unstable. We are simply restructuring our assets. It is a corporate tax strategy." But nobody was buying the lie anymore. The spreadsheet had been too detailed. The eviction notice had been too official. The men who used to laugh at his jokes, smoke his imported cigars, and drink his expensive scotch were now looking at him like he was a diseased rat that had somehow snuck into their pristine dining room. The sheer crushing magnitude of his public humiliation finally hit him. The realization that he had been exposed as a penniless fraud in front of every single person he needed to survive was too much. His knees buckled. Harold Sullivan, the self-proclaimed king of Chicago real estate, collapsed onto the polished wooden floor of the stage. He grasped at his chest, hyperventilating as a full-blown panic attack seized his body. He scrambled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the smooth wood, trying to get away from the furious crowd, but there was nowhere left to run. Beatrice dropped to her knees beside him. But she was not trying to comfort her husband. She was looking out at the furious crowd, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. Dark streaks of mascara ran down her cheeks as she reached her hands out toward the women she had spent years gossiping with. "Please!" Beatrice wailed, her voice shrill and desperate, grasping at the hem of a passing woman's dress. "We are your friends. We hosted you in our home. We went to Aspen together. You cannot turn your backs on us because of that ungrateful, lying girl. We are still the Sullivans." But nobody cared. The wealthy elite of Chicago were incredibly protective of their inner circle, and nothing was more repulsive to them than a parasite pretending to be a peer. The crowd began to turn their backs literally and figuratively. The socialites Beatrice had considered her closest allies looked at her with pure, unfiltered disgust. They yanked their dresses out of her grasp, grabbed their expensive coats, and headed for the exits, muttering about the sheer audacity of the scam. Down in the front row, Brandon sat frozen on the floor, still clutching the divorce papers Aaliyah had shoved into his chest. His fraternity brothers and the young corporate associates he had been trying to impress at the open bar were aggressively ignoring him. They walked past him, as if he were completely invisible. Brandon desperately tried to grab the pant leg of a former college friend walking by. "Hey man, can I get a ride?" Brandon begged, his voice cracking with humiliation. "My car got towed this morning. My sister took everything." The friend yanked his leg away with a look of pure revulsion, dusting off his trousers as if Brandon had infected them. "Get away from me, you broke loser." The friend spat and kept walking toward the exit without a single backward glance. I stood in the foyer listening to the symphony of my family's total destruction. The country club manager Caldwell was already marching down the hall from his office. He was flanked by 3 burly security guards, his face a mask of furious determination. He held a clipboard in one hand, undoubtedly heading into the ballroom to permanently escort the fraudulent Sullivan family off the premises and hand them the bill for the catering they could no longer afford. I pulled my car keys from my pocket, stepped out into the cool, crisp Chicago night air, and handed my ticket to the valet. I tipped him a crisp $100 bill. I watched as my sleek car was brought around the engine, purring softly. It was over. They had nothing left to leverage, nobody left to manipulate, and nowhere left to hide. The sun rose over the meticulously manicured lawns of the Oakbrook subdivision, casting long, elegant shadows across the driveways of million-dollar estates. It was exactly 7:45 on Monday morning. The neighborhood was waking up to its usual routine of landscaping crews and luxury SUVs heading to downtown corporate offices. But at the Sullivan residence, the morning was far from routine. 2 Cook County sheriff's cruisers pulled up to the curb, their heavy tires crunching over fallen autumn leaves. 4 uniformed deputies stepped out, their expressions entirely businesslike. They were accompanied by a locksmith and a representative from my legal team, a sharp-eyed paralegal named Davis, holding a stack of court-ordered eviction documents. I watched the scene unfold through the tinted window of an unmarked black town car parked discreetly down the street. I had hired a private security firm to document the eviction and ensure my property was secured without any physical damage. I wanted to witness the final chapter of my family's entitlement, not to gloat, but to verify that the absolute severance I demanded was executed flawlessly. The lead deputy, a burly man named Harrison, walked up the winding brick path and banged his fist loudly against the double mahogany front doors. The sound echoed through the quiet suburban street, drawing the immediate attention of Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood gossip, who stepped out onto her porch with her morning coffee, her eyes wide with undisguised curiosity. "Open up! Sheriff's Department!" Deputy Harrison yelled, banging on the door a second time. "You are being served with a court-ordered eviction." The door swung open, revealing Harold. He looked completely unraveled. He was wearing wrinkled sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, a jarring contrast to the tailored tuxedo he had worn just 36 hours prior. His silver hair was disheveled, his face pale and haggard. "You cannot do this," Harold pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. He gripped the doorframe, trying to block the deputies from entering. "We need more time. My lawyer is filing an emergency stay. We just need 48 hours to liquidate some assets." "Your lawyer already tried, Mr. Sullivan." Davis, the paralegal, stepped forward, handing Harold a copy of the final judgment. "The judge denied the stay at 6 o'clock this morning. The fraud allegations regarding the mortgage transfer voided any claim to an extension. You have 10 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises, or you will be removed by force." Beatrice appeared behind Harold, clutching a massive, oversized Gucci tote bag that was stuffed to the brim with whatever expensive jewelry and watches she could grab in a panic. She looked wildly around the foyer, her eyes darting from the deputies to the locksmith, who was already unpacking his tools to change the locks on the front door. "Harold, do something!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice shrill and hysterical. "They cannot just throw us out on the street like common criminals. We are the Sullivans. Call Caldwell. Call the mayor." "Ma'am, step aside." Deputy Harrison set his tone, leaving absolutely no room for argument. Two of the deputies moved past Harold, entering the grand foyer to begin clearing the rooms. Brandon stumbled down the grand staircase, dragging a single rolling suitcase behind him. He looked like he had not slept in days. His face was puffy, his eyes bloodshot. He had spent the entire weekend desperately trying to contact Aaliyah, begging her to drop the divorce proceedings, only to find that she had already moved all of her personal belongings out of their luxury condo and blocked his number. Brandon reached the bottom of the stairs just as the deputies were instructing his parents to step out onto the front porch. He froze, staring at the flashing lights of the sheriff's cruisers parked in front of his childhood home. "This cannot be happening," Brandon muttered, his voice barely a whisper. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, his hands shaking violently as he opened his banking app. He had been trying to access his emergency savings all morning, hoping to book a hotel room, but the app kept crashing. The screen finally loaded, displaying his primary checking and savings accounts. A large glaring red banner stretched across the top of the screen. "Account frozen, pending legal review." Brandon let out a strangled gasp, his knees buckling slightly. He tapped the screen frantically, trying to bypass the alert. The balance on his checking account read -$412. The savings account, which he had falsely claimed was seeded by his non-existent venture capital firm, displayed a balance of 0. "Dad!" Brandon yelled, his voice cracking with pure terror. "They froze my accounts." Aaliyah filed the injunction. "I have nothing. I cannot even buy a cup of coffee." Harold did not answer. He was too busy being physically guided out the front door by Deputy Harrison. The patriarch of the Sullivan family stumbled down the brick path, clutching a single leather briefcase filled with worthless, outdated real estate contracts. Beatrice followed closely behind, sobbing loudly, dragging her overstuffed designer bag across the concrete. The locksmith immediately went to work on the front door, swapping out the brass cylinders with rapid efficiency. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind them, the new locks clicking firmly into place. The Sullivan family was officially locked out of the empire they had stolen from me. They stood on the sidewalk, a pathetic, displaced trio, surrounded by their cheap rolling luggage and a single designer tote bag. Harold looked up and down the street. Several neighbors had gathered on their porches, watching the eviction unfold in stunned silence. The men and women who used to attend Harold's lavish summer barbecues were now witnessing his absolute ruin. Nobody offered to help. Nobody stepped forward to offer them a place to stay. Harold pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling as he dialed a number. I knew exactly who he was calling. He was making one final, desperate play. He put the phone to his ear, pacing nervously on the sidewalk, while Beatrice wept onto Brandon's shoulder. "Yes. Is this Mr. Vance at Obsidian Capital?" Harold asked, his voice dripping with forced confidence. "Yes, this is Harold Sullivan. Listen, there has been a slight complication with the collateral on our loan application, but I assure you the guarantor's signature is solid. I just need you to expedite the wire transfer. I need that $250,000 deposited into my secondary business account by noon today." I watched from the tinted window of the town car, a cold, satisfied smile spreading across my face. I reached into my tote bag, pulled out my own smartphone, and dialed the direct line to the private security firm guarding the estate. "Tell Mr. Sullivan to check his email," I instructed the security liaison standing near the deputies. I watched as the security guard approached Harold on the sidewalk and relayed the message. Harold frowned, pulling the phone away from his ear and opening his email app. The email I had sent him was simple, concise, and absolutely devastating. It contained a single PDF attachment. Harold opened the document, his eyes scanning the legal text. It was a formal notice of debt acquisition. The color completely drained from Harold's face. He dropped his phone onto the concrete sidewalk. The screen shattered, but he did not even try to pick it up. He simply stared at the sprawling mansion, the realization of his absolute, inescapable doom, finally crushing the last remnants of his arrogant pride. Harold dropped to his knees on the cold concrete. He ignored the sharp pain shooting up his legs and grabbed his shattered smartphone. The glass screen was severely spiderwebbed, and a small shard sliced into his thumb. But he did not care. A single drop of blood smeared across the cracked display as he frantically swiped away the email I had just sent him. His mind, completely poisoned by decades of narcissistic delusion, refused to accept the PDF document as reality. He convinced himself it was a bluff, a fake legal notice I had generated to scare him into submission. He hit the redial button for Obsidian Capital. He pressed the broken phone against his ear, his breathing ragged and shallow. The line rang 3 times before the gruff, impatient voice of Mr. Thorne, the senior managing partner of the shadow lending firm, answered. "Thorne, listen to me," Harold gasped, spitting the words out in a rapid, desperate frenzy. "I just received a highly suspicious email claiming my debt portfolio was acquired. It is a scam. My ungrateful daughter is trying to interfere with my business operations. Ignore everything associated with her name. I need that $250,000 wire transfer pushed through right now. I am putting up the commercial strip mall deed and the guarantor signature is already verified. Send the funds." There was a heavy, chilling silence on the other end of the line. When Thorne finally spoke, his voice was devoid of the predatory eagerness he usually reserved for desperate borrowers. It was entirely flat and purely transactional. "I am not sending you a single dollar, Harold," Thorne stated coldly. "And I highly recommend you stop mentioning that commercial strip mall deed. My underwriting team conducted a secondary audit on your collateral late Friday afternoon. We discovered you lost that property to a federal bank seizure 4 years ago. You submitted fraudulent collateral to secure a high-yield cash loan. In my line of business, attempting to defraud the lender carries severe, highly unpleasant consequences." Harold felt the remaining color drain from his face. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. "Thorne, please, it was a clerical error. I have other assets. I have equity. Just give me the cash. I need to get my family out of the city today." "You are not going anywhere on my dime," Thorne replied, his tone dripping with absolute contempt. "But you are incredibly lucky, Harold. You are lucky that a boutique financial acquisitions firm approached my partners late last night. They offered to purchase your entire pending loan application, along with the 3 other defaulted shadow debts you have been hiding from the public record. They paid us a premium to take your fraudulent portfolio off our hands. We transferred the digital paper trail and the physical guarantor documents at 6 o'clock this morning. Obsidian Capital no longer holds your debt. We have entirely washed our hands of the Sullivan family." Harold stared at the neighborhood street, his eyes wide with a terrifying, paralyzing confusion. "What are you talking about? Who bought my debt? You cannot just sell my financial profile without my authorization. It is entirely legal in the private equity sector when a borrower is flagged for severe corporate fraud," Thorne countered effortlessly. "You waived your right to authorization the second you submitted a forged signature on federal lending documents. The purchasing entity is registered as Vanguard Horizon Acquisitions. If you want to discuss your massive liabilities, you need to speak to their chief executive officer. I believe she is watching you right now." The line went dead. Harold lowered the shattered phone from his ear. His hands shook violently as he turned his head toward the street. The tinted window of the unmarked black town car parked 50 feet away slowly rolled down. I sat in the luxurious leather back seat, making direct eye contact with the man who had tormented me for my entire adult life. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked at him with the cold, calculating efficiency of a predator who had successfully cornered its prey. I pushed the heavy car door open and stepped out onto the pristine suburban street. I wore a tailored ivory trench coat, the crisp autumn wind catching the hem as I walked methodically toward the pathetic trio standing on the sidewalk. Deputy Harrison and the locksmith paused their work, watching the confrontation unfold in absolute silence. Harold struggled to his feet, his knees trembling so badly he had to lean against Beatrice for support. Beatrice shrank away from him, her eyes darting frantically between me and the police cruisers. Brandon remained frozen next to his cheap luggage, completely terrified. "You," Harold whispered, the realization hitting him with the force of a freight train. "You are Vanguard Horizon Acquisitions." I stopped 10 feet away from them, clasping my hands comfortably in front of me. "Yes, Harold, I am. Did you honestly think I spent the last 10 years just paying your bills and waiting for your approval? I worked 80-hour weeks in the financial technology sector. I earned massive corporate bonuses, secured lucrative stock options, and invested every single dollar that you did not manage to steal from me. I built a war chest. And when Aaliyah handed me the evidence of your forged loan application, I knew exactly how to use my capital." I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The sound of my heels on the concrete was the only noise on the street. "You wanted to run away," I stated clearly, ensuring every word resonated in the quiet morning air. "You wanted to take $250,000 in dirty money, abandon your legal liabilities, and flee the state. But I bought your debt, Harold. I bought the forged application. I bought the arrears you owe to your previous investors. I own every single financial obligation you have left in this world." "Why would you do this?" Beatrice wailed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You are ruining us. We have nothing left. We are your family." I turned my gaze to my mother, feeling absolutely zero pity for her tears. "You ruined yourselves, Beatrice. You forged my name. You stole my credit. You treated me like a disposable resource. If you owe a traditional bank, they simply ruin your credit score and write off the loss. But if you owe me, I make sure you pay for it every single day for the rest of your natural lives." I looked back at Harold, delivering the final, inescapable truth. "All your paths are blocked," I said, translating the reality into a language his greedy mind could perfectly understand. "If you try to open a new checking account, my firm will garnish it. If you somehow manage to secure a minimum wage job, I will legally seize your paychecks to satisfy your outstanding debts. If you try to rent a cheap apartment, my legal team will flag your background check with active fraud judgments. You are permanently locked out of the financial system. You are utterly, entirely trapped." Harold opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. His breathing was shallow and erratic. He looked at the sprawling mansion he used to claim as his own, then down at the shattered phone in his bleeding hand. The illusion of his superiority was dead. The empire was ashes. "Enjoy your new life, Harold," I said, turning my back on them. "It is exactly what you earned." I walked back to the town car, my posture perfectly straight. I did not look back as I climbed into the back seat and closed the heavy door. The driver immediately put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the Sullivan family standing on the sidewalk, entirely consumed by the prison of their own making. 6 months later, the morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office in downtown Chicago. As a newly promoted director of operations, I finally had a workspace that reflected my actual worth, far away from the suburban chaos that used to drain my energy every single day. The view of the skyline was breathtaking, but the absolute quiet of the room was what I valued most. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark roast coffee, savoring the rich, unbothered silence. On my polished mahogany desk sat a single manila folder. It contained the finalized deed transfer for the Oakbrook mansion. Yesterday afternoon, I had officially sold the property at a significant discount to a prominent nonprofit organization. The group provided transitional housing for women escaping domestic and financial abuse. Harold's precious fortress of ego, the very house he used to project his fake superiority, was now a designated sanctuary for people escaping manipulators exactly like him. The poetic justice of that transaction was worth every penny I had spent. My personal phone buzzed lightly on the desk. A new message illuminated the screen. It was from Aaliyah. She had finalized her brutal, airtight divorce from Brandon 2 weeks ago, leaving him with nothing but his ruined credit score and zero assets. She had also just been named a senior partner at her corporate law firm. Her text message was short, sharp, and perfect. "Freedom is absolutely wonderful." I smiled, a genuine warm expression that finally reached my eyes. I typed back a quick message of agreement, celebrating her victory as much as my own. We had both walked through the fire and emerged entirely unscathed. Then I opened my main contact list. I scrolled down to the blocked section. Harold, Beatrice, Brandon. Their names had been silenced for months, but they still lingered in my digital orbit like stubborn ghosts from a past life. I selected each name one by one and pressed delete. I did not just block them. I completely erased their numbers, their email addresses, and their entire digital footprint from my device. I permanently purged them from my existence, leaving no trace of their toxicity behind. I reached up to my neck and unclasped a delicate gold heirloom necklace resting against my collarbone. It was the only item of real sentimental value I had retrieved from Beatrice's jewelry collection before the eviction process began. I held the cool metal in the palm of my hand, looking at my reflection in the vast office window. I looked strong. I looked untouchable. For 10 years, I had been conditioned to believe that family required endless, agonizing sacrifice. I had let them convince me that love was a financial debt I had to constantly repay to earn my place at their table. But standing here today, completely independent and entirely in control of my own destiny, I knew the absolute truth. Boundaries are not walls built to punish other people. They are armor forged to protect your own peace. I placed the gold necklace into a small velvet box on my desk and closed the lid with a satisfying, definitive snap. "What did you do to our money?" I whispered to the empty, peaceful room, echoing the furious question Harold had screamed at me in his kitchen so many months ago. "No, Harold," I said, leaning back in my executive leather chair and looking out over the city that belonged to me. "That was simply the price of my absolute freedom." The harrowing journey of cutting off a toxic family teaches a profound lesson about the true nature of personal boundaries. Society frequently conditions us to believe that family demands endless, unquestioning sacrifice, dictating that we must endure financial exploitation and emotional manipulation simply because we share DNA. However, this narrative illustrates that true empowerment comes from recognizing when loyalty has been weaponized into abuse. When the protagonist finally locked her accounts and severed the financial umbilical cord tying her to her father and brother, she didn't just protect her hard-earned money. She reclaimed her autonomy, her future, and her self-worth. We learn that walking away from narcissistic abusers, even if they are your own parents or siblings, is not an act of malice or vengeance. It is a necessary step for emotional and financial survival. The ultimate payoff isn't merely about outsmarting the abusers or orchestrating a public downfall. It is the absolute quiet peace that follows when you stop trying to buy the love of people who only value you as a disposable resource. Take a hard look at the relationships in your own life today and find the courage to build the ironclad boundaries you need to protect your peace.